Yeah. Oh, yeah. Okay. Sounds good. Thanks.
Oh.
So, but that I can do when Matt.
Good morning. I'm continuing to people here.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Morning, Corey. Good morning, Doc Murphy. All right. All right, I'm gonna give you a few more, another minute or two. We can make sure we get everybody in here. So let's see. If you are on and you're using a phone or something that's generic, like an iPhone, let me see, I can ask these people. I'd like for you to identify yourself, please. So there's a UMG.
How loud?
It's pretty loud.
Okay.
UMG is Mark Gwen with Purdue.
Thank you, Mark. I'll find you back here. All right. I think I have at least. There's an UMS 6834. Anybody claim that one?
That's Matt Simmons with Purdue.
Thank you. Okay, make sure. All right, I think we're good there. Good morning. Things have kind of slowed down here in the waiting room, so we'll get started. Thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate your kind of taking time out of your day to really focus on this. Certainly, if you've seen some of the news here in the last 2 weeks, you know, we have highly pathogenic avian influenza in wild birds on our eastern coast, and that's definitely got us paying a little bit more attention. So very timely. This morning, it would have been really nice to have been able to be all together, just for a variety of reasons, decided we shouldn't do that. One of which is we're recording this session, and my hope is that people can use it in the future as training or for reference. So just so that you're aware that it is being recorded. While we're doing presentations, if you could put questions in the chat, that would, and we'll kind of hold questions until we kind of get to the end of that section, and then visit that chat and work through the question. I don't know if I must have the power to, yeah, I need to find that power.
Recording in progress.
So if you could also turn your cameras on, you know, when you're asking a question, we'll try our best to make it at least kind of feel like we're in person. So without further ado, too many folks, I think, on, which is a good problem to have everybody introduce themselves individually. But we have the agenda here, and please, as the presenters come up, please introduce yourselves and help people understand where you are and what your role is. Let's see. Any questions on any of those instructions before we go forward? All right. So let me just kick it off here with let's see. All right, welcome again. Where's my slideshow? I will keep putting the agenda back up here. I believe you all should have received that in an email yesterday. So we'll keep kind of referring back to that so you know where we are. Just a quick snippet of the significance of Indiana's poultry industry, kind of why we're motivated to get y'all involved in this conversation. We have $4.25 billion direct impact Indiana's economy. I know Dr. Kopp is going to review this a little bit more detail. We are very significant nationally in our poultry production. I think it's helpful for folks who maybe aren't quite as involved to see where our animals are. So our duck is primarily up in that northeastern corner of the state with smaller barns typically. Our egg layers are kind of all over the state. And we have a wide variety of production styles and sizes of barns. This is a cage-free operation in that photo. Turkey is predominantly in the southwestern part of the state. And we just had 2 great turkeys go to the White House. Oh, gotta let Drew in here. And then we also have broiler chickens. We're not ranked as highly nationally in this sector, but we do have 2 really sizable companies and complexes with broiler chickens as well. Avian influenza is kind of a constant threat. We had a very significant incident in the US in 2015. Many of you were involved in paying attention to that. Then we had an incident here in Indiana in 2016, which sadly gave us the opportunity to work through what, all the things we need to do to respond. We are motivated to protect the food supply. That is, kind of primary, the primary foundation of why we really move on this. We're also always concerned about trade restrictions. When we have an incident in Indiana, that really does affect our ability to trade both within the nation and foreign trade. And I know Mike Kopp's going to be doing some of this. This is, if you need to see it in just on one page, this is what a response looks like. And you will see as we work through our initial state response and containment plan, it contains all these steps, maybe not quite in this exact order. You know which button I hit to mute everybody? Okay, you will go do that. Okay. Okay. All right, let's see here. And I'm gonna stop now and introduce my colleague, Dr. Michael Kopp, who is a huge help to us, and he is going to talk with us about the initial state response and containment plan.
Host disabled participants change screen sharing.
Uh-oh.
You have to enable
yeah,
my screen
okay,
sharing.
I will. I know what you're talking about. I should have done that when I got all set up. All right, you should be set. All right. Thanks, Dr. Kopp. We can see it.
All right. Thank you. Well, I'm going to talk a little bit about HiPath AI current status, along with we're going to look at Canadian and US 2020, 21 and 22, and we're also going to look at Canada back in time of 2014-15. And first off, we'd like to look at the outbreaks in Europe sorry about that, I'm clicking too fast.
It's not going to go away.
All right. We're going to be looking at first how our outbreaks in Europe have been the highest ever recorded, and that was from October 2020 to September 2021. We had over 3,700 outbreaks, and there's been 31 European countries that have been affected with 23 million birds. It's pretty sensitive there, sorry. All right, so then we saw this outbreaks that have been going on in Europe. Now this H5N1 HiPath AI Eurasian strains have crossed the Atlantic Ocean and was first found in Newfoundland Island, Canada. And it was first reported in a mixed species hobby flock on 12/22/21. And then as the Canadian government set up their control areas at 10 kilometer, 6.2 mile radius, they found additional cases. Of course, again, that first flock you can see on that slide is that yellow dot to the highest to the right. That's near St. John City. And in that original hobby flock, they had 419 birds, and they had a 78% mortality in that flock. Also, that green triangle you see is the one wild gull they found in the area with neurologic signs that also tested positive for that H5N1 HiPath AI Eurasian strain. And then that other orange or yellow circle is the second hobby flock that had 3 dead birds, and then only had a total of 18 birds in that hobby flock made up of 15 ducks and 3 chickens. Then if you look all the way up to the upper left, you see another green square, green triangle, and that is outside the control area sampling, and that was another wild gull that was found in Bristol Hope. From a standpoint too, the new OIE May 2021 meeting, they have found and decided that if you find high path AI in wild or hobby birds, while it has to be reported to the OIE, the World Organization for Animal Health, that should result in no trade bans. Well, and then we see that high path AI H5N1 Eurasian strain flies to the United States. Along that, probably the Atlantic flyway, represented by those black birds on that eastern shore. And this has been the first high path AI Eurasian strain in the United States since 2016. Well, also too, then, as we see that happening, where we first detected was this Eurasian strain was detected in Colton County, South Carolina. That was first reported in a wild American widgeon on January 14th of this year. As they continue to do surveillance, and we're thankful for Wildlife Services and DNR, the work they do there for surveillance in our wild bird populations. The second was in the same South Carolina county, and it was a wild blue-winged teal. Then we, with the surveillance again, a third reported Hyde County, North Carolina, in a wild northern shoveler. And this is interesting to note that actually the last domestic poultry outbreak of high path AI and H7N3, it was a North American strain. We found that actually also in 2020 in South Carolina. Well, while we bring this up, and of course, is this going to be a repeat of 2014-15? Could this 2021 high path AI H5N1 Eurasian strain coming to the US create what we saw in 2014-15, which is depicted in this slide, where detection in Europe in late 2014, then as they intermixed over wintering sites around the Arctic Circle, they moved, the migratory birds moved into Alaska, came down into Canada in November of 2014, and that was a H5N2 in British Columbia. And as you see there on the slide, actually too, this was a Eurasian strain that mixed with our North American strains. So the hemagglutinin, or the H5, was the Eurasian high path AI strain that mixed with our neuraminidase N2 North American strain. And then we saw the outbreak that started in 2014-15, again in Washington State there in December of 2014. Of course, that result of that outbreak, again, there was further mixing of the H5 Eurasian strain. We had an N2. Interesting, in Indiana, we had an H5N8 outbreak in a small flock in northern Indiana, small hobby flock. And then there was also even an H5N1. Again, that was the mixing of these Eurasian strains with the North American strains, which we haven't seen any Eurasian strains since 2016. Well, in that, we see depicted in green on the map, 15 states saw domestic poultry with cases in that outbreak from 2014-15. Over 50 million birds had to be affected or were destroyed, with the last outbreak or last case was in June of that year in 2015. It's been estimated then that the actual cost to producers was 1.6 billion in producer losses and over 3 billion impact on the US economy. Well, just to let you know, besides the wild bird surveillance, our producers and our poultry industry have a very robust surveillance system to continue to look for avian influenza. And if you look at the federal fiscal year for the NPIP program, which starts in July and ends in June, so for 2020 to 2021, the poultry industry, to assure the public that we don't have AI of any type, either high path or low path, going to the market, they do pre-testing of all their flocks before they go to market, whether it's broilers, turkeys, egg layers, or ducks. So we've saw over 2 million tests there for avian influenza in over 125,000 flocks, covering over 7 billion birds out there in the United States, and that's for 1 year. So a lot of surveillance done by our producers under either the NPIP breeding flock program, which is depicted there in the red, or the NPIP commercial production flocks there in that green color. Then we add even the other tests, either in the live bird marketing system, where producers and distributors do that testing in our backyard flocks, and then even our passive surveillance that we do like at the Indiana Animal Disease Diagnostic Lab, either at Purdue or SciPac. That adds up over 3 million AI tests a year. So the industry and from a domestic standpoint for poultry are continuing to look at AI, again, to assure themselves that we're not moving that disease as we go to market, or assuring the public that there is AI in these birds going to market. And just an interest too, the first NPIP AI clean program actually started in 1998. So that's kind of an update of our current status in the United States right now, and Canada with these Eurasian strains. Again, first time ever we saw them again since 2016 back in the United States and Canada. Thank you. So back to you, Becky.
Okay, thank you, Mike. Now let me see, we'll move into the next portion of our agenda. First, I guess, any questions for Dr. Kopp on kind of the current, kind of how we got here and the current status? Okay. Okay, well, the next item on our agenda is just our overall response plan, and introduction of the avian influenza initial state response and containment plan. Dr. Kopp will do a lot of the talking again on this. And many thanks to Dr. Kopp, his many years of involvement with Indiana State Poultry Association. For a long time, we've had plans that address our emergency response and disease preparedness. But here in the last couple of years, the USDA has kind of put out a different format that plan needs to follow. And he worked very hard to get us into that format. So, Dr. Kopp, do you want to start the PowerPoint from your end, or do you want me to start it here?
No, I can start it here, Becky, if you're ready for the
Okay.
Indiana AI plan overview.
Yeah, I think yep, please do.
All right. Well, we're going to cover the Indiana AI plan overview, and this is required by USDA for us to have a low path AI program. We just covered high path AI, but this is actually covering the low path AI in the United States. And basically, and this is the same document that's been sent out early, we have a 4-page for you. Becky has sent out a 4-page overview of all the different points that the USDA APHIS VS NPIP program requires in that plan. And basically the purpose, of course, why are we doing this anyway, but for states to must have a low path AI initial state response containment plan, or ISRCP, for poultry owners to get 100% indemnity and 100% compensation. Now, This traditionally has been always developed by the NPIP official state agency as it's written in the Code of Federal Regulations. And of course, our Indiana State Poultry Association is our Indiana NPIP official state agency. Now, the initial state response containment plan must be managed by the cooperating state agencies, which along with ISPA is the Board of Animal Health. So we are the cooperating state agencies. And we look to also for the expertise of our other Indiana state agencies to support us as cooperating state agencies when we have to take action on our initial state response containment plan for a low path incident. And so this also too then for the final, the Indiana low path AI incident initial state response containment plan, the Indiana AI plan must be approved by veterinary services. And of course, 100% indemnity and compensation. This is a very unique program in our animal health and other regulatory programs, is that because of the commitment by the poultry industry, as we saw all that testing and other work they have done to try to assure the public that we're not moving avian influenza to the market and to prevent its spread between producer to producer or farm to farm, the USDA, with the work of the Congress, has granted in the CFR 100% indemnity compensation if you meet all these requirements of your initial state response containment plan and the other various requirements. And then indemnity then is the fair market value of birds and eggs, and compensation then covers all those other costs for depopulation, disposal, and C&D. Was Becky touched on a little bit, of course, what, the importance of a 100% plan or 100% insurance for our producers. All the work they do is very important to Indiana with the poultry industry and an economic impact. You can see there how many jobs is created by the industry and over $14.5 billion a year in income that they provide for the state of Indiana. Of course, Indiana is small, but we're very powerful as we rank in our poultry production in the US. And of course, on the map there, you see all the different 12,345 avian species premises that we have. The blue depicts our non-commercial flocks, and then the green then depicts those commercial flocks. And again, we're first in duck production, second in table eggs, second in egg type chick hacks, third in turkey production by pounds of meat. We're actually sixth in organic egg production and 14th in broiler production. Well, when we look at any kind of response to eradicate any disease, we got to think about not just those infected sites at the bottom of the triangle, those hopefully just few sites, like we had 12 sites in our 2016 outbreak, but you have to look at what's at the bottom of the slide. We have over 1,258 Indiana farms with over 82 million birds out there. So we got to think about not just those infected sites when we make a response, to ensure we don't destroy the Indiana poultry industry and we continue with business continuity. Of course, there'll be the negative flocks in the control area, that 6.2 mile radius, as well as a surveillance zone that might extend even another 6.2 miles beyond that for the control and surveillance area where we're doing testing and sampling and issuing permits for movement. And then hopefully we can keep business usual for those negative flocks that are outside in that free type area. Well, it's all based on a cooperative industry, state, federal programs. The NPIP has done that since 1935, and we've had great success in our state with the cooperation of all groups. Of course, our first defense is always our poultry industry and producers, who will develop their own AI plans, as they have done before from the Emerging Poultry Disease Plan and now from this new Indiana AI plan. Of course, the second defense is our Indiana NPIP official state agency, the ISPA, as they institute and develop the Indiana AI plan. Of course, our third defense is we join them as a cooperating state agency to help them manage that plan. Then our fourth defense is, of course, all the supporting Indiana state agencies. And then our fifth defense will be our Indiana Veterinary Service Office. And then our sixth defense will be our VS National Office. So we have some great defense out there to hopefully give us the best offense to keep this out. Well, then looking at the general guidance and why we have this out there by the Veterinary Services and USDA. And it all started in 2006 with the NPIP Low Path Control Program. And if we go back in time a little bit even before that, we've had an emergency disease control program, or as Paul Brennan liked to say, EPDP, Emergency Poultry Disease Plan. And that was actually created following the 1983-84 high path A outbreaks in Pennsylvania. And that was the first time in history we actually saw an H5 low path avian influenza convert to a high path avian influenza. And so that's when there started to be emphasis on, well, we need to look at not just our high path AI H5 and H7 subtypes, but we also need to be looking at our low path. So that's been updated over the years, and it's always been our Indiana low path AI plan, initial state response plan. Well, in 2006, industry wanted to push to make sure the public knew that poultry was safe to eat. That was following when we had, starting in 1997, we had this first H5N1 Asian high path AI strain in Hong Kong, jumping and causing human deaths. And then in 2003, as it continued to move in Asian countries, we saw 50% human mortality with this strain. So again, that's what pretty much started our program here in the United States. At that time, we didn't have any, the Pacific Ocean and the Atlantic Ocean kept us pretty safe from any of these Asian strains or Eurasian strains of high path AI. But again, the industry moved with the USDA and our Congress to create this CFR 2006 NPIP low path AI control program. Now, the initial state response containment plan is not the only requirement to have to get your 100% indemnity. Also, too, the commercial poultry has to do all that active surveillance, which we saw earlier. There was over 2 million tests they're doing, the NPIP testing, as well as the up and up to the 3 million tests of the diagnostic passive surveillance, which we do in a lot of backyard flocks and other flocks when we see signs of disease, and getting the support, of course, are both poultry labs in the state and the ADDL lab at West Lafayette, Purdue University, and the ADDL lab down in Southern Indiana. Of course, the incentive is great. Again, if you meet all these 3 requirements, you get 100% indemnity and compensation. However, if you don't meet these 3 requirements, USDA will only pay 25% indemnity and compensation. Well, USDA, as they went along, continued to look at how they can improve the initial state response and containment plan. And again, as we just reported on the 2014-15, was many lessons were learned after that large outbreak where we had 50 million birds destroyed. And after even other outbreaks like our 2016 outbreak we had in Indiana, and other outbreaks in 17 and 18, and actually the last one again we reported on in 2020 in South Carolina. So USDA decided they needed to create some new procedures, policies, and resources. Many of these are found on the websites, are included in the Indiana AI plan under the Foreign Animal Disease Preparedness and Response Plan, the FAD PREP. And then also to help out states, Veterinary Services side, we need to come up with new guidance for the low path AI plans. And they put out a memorandum document. You see that BS 8601.2 for development and approval of the new plans for H5, H7 low path AI. Then with all the, as they came out with that, in July of 2020, Veterinary Services asked the states to change any existing, like our existing EPDP, to this new initial state response containment plan guidance. And then Paul Brennan at the time at ISBA gave the date of we'll have our new plan out by April 15, 2020. And that's what you've been given is the new low path AI initial state response containment plan, basically as our Indiana AI plan. Of course, as you look at the plan, or either the executive type summary or the whole plan, you'll see that many of the low path guidance will match high path guidance, and many of the things that we learned again in high path AI we've used as we develop low path AI plans. Well, what is partly included in that guidance is these 14 NPIP required components as found in 9 CFR Part 5610A. And also the guidance includes additional recommended details. And of course, our Indiana AI plan contains those, and they're numbered 01 to 14 in there. And then we have added a lot of additional guidance and information to help as much as we can producers and responders in that. And those attachments are links, are listed throughout the AI plan as you review it. And again, we want to give you as many tools as possible that we have learned throughout since 2014-15. And again, it's also too what the federal government, with all their information they have on their various websites to help companies as they develop their own premise plans and company plans to use during an AI incident. And it just gave you looking at a total, there's 45 total attachments, 131 links. So you have 176 resources out there to help you make decisions on what to do during an AI incident. It's interesting to note, as you may look at some of those at the top, many of those will have a date of 2016 coming from our Indiana High Path AI outbreak, where we led in the nation in developing a lot of new techniques of how to deal with a high path, and we had low path farms there too. Well, this is your only slide. We're going to talk a little bit by virology. Definitions are used or referenced directly in the AI plan, and there is a whole definition document included in the AI plan. But when we think about avian influenza, it's in the family of orthomyxovirus. I want to make sure everybody realizes it's not a coronavirus, an orthomyxovirus family, and is namely a type A influenza. We have other types in humans, but in avians, they're all type A. And how you name it, as we continue to talk about that over and over, it's named by its subtypes, the pathogenicity, and the strain. So again, it's named by those outer protein coats you see, or outer proteins, the hemagglutinin, these spikes sticking out. And in avian species, we've identified H1 to H16, and then the neuraminidase is the N portion, and we've identified in avian species N1 to N9. So if you just took 16 times 9, we could have 144 different possible subtypes out there in birds. Then as pathogenicity, we talked a lot, obviously in the earlier part, about the highly pathogenic, the HP part, or low pathogenic, the LP. Then finally, you can look at, in simple naming, either it's a North American strain, which we see as part of our endemic strains here in the United States, or these other Asian or Eurasian strains that again causes great concern. Currently in avian species for domestic poultry, we only look for control in an H5 or H7. These are the strains that we've seen create the highly pathogenic avian influenza, and we'll also then control the low pathogenic avian influenza in these strains too, to make sure that they don't convert to high path. And in each one of the sections, you'll notice that we give either a person or organization to reference to. If you have questions in this whole section A through H, you can contact ISPA to help you with that. Well, number one item that's a required component is the planning committee, which in the program has to have provisions for planning, regular meeting, and exercises for avian influenza. The committee, and this is highlighting everything that's in the plan from a highlighted basis, not trying to get into too much detail, but give you an overall view of what's in the plan. That committee is the ISPA board chaired by the NPIP OSA contact, which is Becky. And then we have the federal, state, and Purdue ADL personnel as ex officio members. The ISPA will communicate all AI information between members. And then the plan must be reviewed and updated annually. And then the ISPA will submit that plan to review to the veterinary services every 5 years. And again, it's been submitted to them as of that date of 4/15 when we submitted it to veterinary services. Of course, with COVID and other issues, we haven't got response back, but in all the meetings we've been in, our conference calls, they continue to say, if you have a plan entered after this request for new plans, then your plan, we have your plan. So, and again, in any situation or circumstance, we may not be able to, even with all the tools we have provided, either links or attachments, may not apply. So if some situation comes up that may not apply, and any changes, updates, or deviation decisions need to be made to the plan, that will be made by the cooperating state agency, which will be represented by the Indiana State Poultry Association, Becky, and BOA, Dr. Brett Marsh. And then if you have any questions on that section as you look through it, you can contact Jeffrey at ISPA or Denise at our office. Number 2 required component is biosecurity and prevention. And this requires, to get your 100% indemnity or compensation, a minimum biosecurity plan must be followed by all poultry producers. And that biosecurity is critical, of course, we know, to prevent AI outbreak and spread. And first of that portion, since this is an NPIP program, that producer and company must be following all the provisions and standards specific for their NPIP subpart, whether they're layers, broilers, turkeys, ducks, breeders, or commercial. And then that plan and that provisions is reviewed and inspected annually for compliance by ISPA. Then again, they must have a written biosecurity plan. They must use every day. Every NPIP premise does that. This has been outlined in NPIP program standard E, which is a different 14, but it's 14 biosecurity principles. And again, that's reviewed and audited every 2 years for compliance by ISPA. And of course, every company and producer, as part of the readiness, should look at this whole new AI plan for guidance, information, and additional steps or specific items they might want to include in their own plans. And the ISPA poultry health specialist overseeing this area of the plan would be contacting Chelsea Leatherman. Well, the third component is diagnostic lab and submission of samples, and that's provision to make sure every state has adequate diagnostic resources. And we're very blessed in the state of Indiana with our 2 labs at Purdue University, again at ADDL, West Lafayette, and SIPAC, along with our NPIP labs. ISPA has made a commitment as the OSA for NPIP that we want as many firehouses out there as possible and volunteer fire people. So besides our 2 state labs, our company labs can work through ISPA to become an NPIP authorized lab. So they can do much of this initial testing and work for the NPIP, those over 2 million tests we saw. So they can do that work and allow the state labs to be the backup to them. When we think about diagnostic resources, also too, one other program the NPIP through the ISP has is the AI sampling school, where because we don't have enough veterinarians in the state to do all this testing, company personnel and others can become authorized agents to take these samples for avian influenza. And of course, in peacetime, then there's all these NPIP AI participation testing, those over 2 million tests, which you saw before, which are constantly looking for the disease when we have no outbreaks. Then during an avian influenza incident, we must be following the NVSL guidelines, which are linked in the Indiana AI plan, And we'll be collecting AI swabs for PCR testing. And those swabs will be sent to ADDL at Purdue and West Lafayette. Of course, we'll be taking a increased number, especially in our control areas, over our normal background piece-taking testing, which we would do in normal participation testing. And of course, we look at our NPIP company labs assisting in collecting samples to the lab. And just always a note, in an outbreak scenario, I want to make sure we get those pre-printed federal premise ID barcode labels on all those submissions and swab samples to make sure that we can quickly assess what it is. And for information on that, you can either, again, contact Chelsea Leatherman or Dr. Jeff Fossey up at Purdue. Well, number 4, suspect flock investigation. How important it is to have details for handling an investigation of suspected flocks. And of course, the most important thing there is make sure, first off, all poultry premises and facilities are registered with BOA, with Dr. Cooper, and make sure as you move or change owners or change ownership, we get all those updated changes. So if we get a suspect, we'll know immediately where it is, and immediately then we can start drawing those 6.2 mile and 6.2 mile surveillance zones. That was very critical in our 2016 outbreak, because when we got that first suspect report with an increased mortality and some of our preliminary testing, we contacted companies in that area right away, because we knew who was in that 6.2 mile radius because of the registering with BOA for your premises. And because of that, we actually had samples being pulled at the same time. We had samples going to NBSL for confirmation of it. And again, it turned out then to be high path AI2. And then after you report it as an AI suspect, depending on the situation and what Dr. Cooper gathers, we'll either direct you to send just one set of samples to Purdue ADL, or as we did in 2016, we actually got a plane to fly that second set of samples to NBSL. And then, of course, while you're waiting results, you need to initiate a self-quarantine and put enhanced biosecurity on that, and make sure all personnel involved in that premise are taking appropriate biosecurity steps. And of course, in this whole section, then we'll be communicating to agencies, investigating again using the important USA herds database that we maintain here at BOA. And then we'll be consulting with, as a cooperating state agency, with Indiana VS office on next possible steps, whether we need indemnity or compensation, and considering all the needs there. And again, Dr. Cooper heads that up in that section, along with Dr. Angela Hines from the Indiana VS office, if we get involved in where we need that federal backing too. Number 5, then, a reporting of non-negative results. Of course, any NPIP company labs and producers must immediately report any suspect avian influenza or any non-negative AI samples to ISPA and BOA. And again, as we talked about, official determination of a confirmed infected flock or premise can only be made by NBSL. Even though we get preliminary results, maybe out of Purdue ADL, we want to make sure before we report that to other states or countries or anyone else to not impact trade. We only want to be talking about those test results, those non-negative results, after we get confirmation to NBSL. And then, of course, once it gets confirmation from NBSL, only the veterinary service reports whether it's high path or low path AI to the World Organization of Animal Health, OIE, and to our trading partners. Because again, we looked at the economic impact of the industry, how we lead in so many different areas of poultry industry. We want to make sure that we keep that trade open and business continuity going. It is of note that the OIE in May of 21 updated their AI chapter and poultry definition. Of course, as we talked about with the Canadian and US wild bird and domestic hobby flocks, you have to report immediately any high path AI in any bird. But again, under the new rules they've made in 2021 with the AI chapter and poultry definition, you only restrict trade to the new poultry definition. And that would be only what we see on the next line of poultry for breeding or production of commercial animal products. So again, that wild bird reporting in the US or the wild bird in Canada should not restrict trade if everybody plays fair, according to OIA rules. And it would also not include these hobby flocks or any other birds kept for shows, racing zoos. Pet birds are not poultry, or any birds that just used for a single household and not entering commerce are not poultry. Now they also changed it too, as we saw how many outbreaks, the 3,700 high path outbreaks have been experienced in Europe. They have mainly now want to concentrate on high path AI. So there's been a change here again that only report low path AI depending on virulence and impact potential. We'll have to see how that works out overall. We do have some bilateral trading agreements with other trading partners that any low path AI we have to report to them. But currently the way it's worded, you only have to report low path AI if it has either a high virulence or impact potential on human health. Well, number 6 is presumptive or infected flock quarantines. And of course, we're going to immediately quarantine any of those AI presumptive positives that would be diagnosed at one of our diagnostic labs, state labs. And then again, when we get infected results from NVSL, that quarantine would continue. Of course, you want to do basic things, maybe shut down that site if we have results going to Purdue as a suspect, and especially after we get that presumptive positive. You don't allow animals, products, or anything manure to leave the premise, stop all vehicle and human traffic, establish a vehicle cleaning station, and then those personnel that had contact should not be visiting other poultry without doing enhanced biosecurity. So then again, as we quarantine that flock, we'll be looking at doing epi surveys to determine what are their contact premises we need to quarantine until we can do all the testing, and then control area premises too. And Dr. Shipman at our BOA office heads up that section. Looking at our infected and exposed flock plans then, what are we going to do with this flock? Once we determine it is AI infected, veterinary service wants a flock plan that describes what methods you're going to use in depopulation, disposal, and virus elimination, and then especially who is going to be responsible. Are you going to use outside contractor? Is the company going to do it? Is the producer going to do it? And who's going to do these various processes? Of course, before depopulation, veterinary services has to have an appraisal indemnity form completed, so we know what's going to be paid at the fair market value of those birds and eggs to the producer and the company. And then later on, then as we move forward, they want to know additional forms and reports for how much VS compensation is going to cover depopulation, disposal, and C&D costs. In the plan is these flock plan templates and procedure forms, which veterinary service has done a great job of laying those all out for either commercial flock plans and procedures or backyard hobby and flock plans. Of course, to be paid by USDA, you have to have this DUNS number and you have to have the annual SAM registration. And for further questions on that area, Dr. Kyle Shipman, Dr. Lynn over at the veterinary service office keeps us track of that area. Well, we look next then after depopulation, after the infected part, we look at depopulation disposal. You have to look at what's appropriate for the industry, whether we're talking about, of course, ducks or broilers or turkeys or caged layers, and what is around the area, and then choose the appropriate depopulation methods. And those have to be as listed in the Indiana plan approved by veterinary services or using the appropriate AVMA depopulation guidelines or the American Association of Avian Pathologists. And VS will not pay indemnity unless they approve of the appropriate depopulation method of how you're going to get rid of those birds. And then Also, too, you have to look at then disposing of those carcasses of those depopulated birds, whether it's composting, rendering, incineration, or burial. And we look for companies and producers to plan ahead of time biosecure disposal places where they have pre-existing agreements with other businesses or pre-identified disposal or landfill sites. And of course, in all these cases, we want to make sure that there's implementing strict biosecurity procedures for movement, often on that farm as you do these procedures. Again, Kyle Shipman heads up that section from my office. Then we look at C&D and repopulation, disposal of all that contaminated feed, litter, manure, and debris that might still be left on the site after removal of the carcasses, and whether you want to look to compost that material in-house along with the birds or move it by permit to an approved site. Again, looking at C&D premises equipment, whether using dry or wet methods. In recent years, veterinary services have liked to use the dry method with a possible heat treatment for virus elimination, as it has proved very effective. And we were the actually ones in 2016, the work of our poultry companies in Southern Indiana and Dr. Kyle Shipman to actually work out the procedures. So if you go to look at the procedures for virus elimination by heat treatment, that is an Indiana document that has been worked out in our 2016 high-path AI operate. Then after that, you want to follow post-C&D environmental sampling, which again, that was worked out in mostly our 2016 outbreak. And again, that reference document is included as a link in our Indiana plan. Then you just need to follow the restocking timeline, eligibility, and approval policies. Make sure that you're testing negative, those flocks going back on that premise, as well as following appropriate testing after we put that flock in there to make sure there has been no exposure after all those work we've done. Again, Dr. Shipman is our expert or individual you want to contact in that area. We're looking then now at number 10, control area zone setup and release. The control area is usually, again, that 6.2 mile radius around. We might even set up that possible surveillance zone at 10 kilometers or 6.2 mile added on top of that. We're going to find all those contact premises. Again, we talked about 21 days, which is the normal incubation period, which we look at avian influenza. I will say we'll have to look at it. That still comes from the VS memorandum. But again, in that May 2021 meeting, OIE, international people have looked at, and members have looked at a 14-day. So we'll have to look at currently how veterinary services, whether or not we'll change our guidance here or we'll stick to our older 21-day time period of incubation period before infection. Of course, BOA has developed an Indiana permit to move for poultry and poultry products in that control area for any of those negative tested flocks. And you want to make sure that you have somebody on your staff trained to how to complete that permit and test it to be able to email and receive it back to Dr. Cooper here in our office. And you then, as to be able to permit, you need to complete appropriate AI testing, take all your flock parameters, make sure they're all normal, and make sure you're following all the biosecurity protocols for your truck and driver and product. Number 11 then is the control area premises and test for movement. You need to swab, of course, test all commercial premises in that control area, and we're upping then our normal 11 bird swabs per house for AI up to 22. That's the new national standard. And we're looking at 2 to 11 bird ACI PCR pools per house within 24 hours, be able to move birds or products off that premise. Then hatching and table eggs also have to follow a 2-day holding procedure. And most of these are found in a secure poultry supply plan for the type of operation or product. And then we'll also be looking at additional testing of commercial backyard flocks in that area to complete our surveillance testing to make sure that we can tell USDA and our trading partners that we're able to know that we've eliminated or eradicated that disease in our control area, to release those trade bans and provide for export requirements. And then contact myself or Dr. Angela Hines on export issues in that area. Then number 12 is looking at vaccination. And maybe you should first look at the bottom verse versus the top, but probably veterinary service will probably not approve use of any AI vaccine. It is in part of the program though, as a possibility, but with all the trade restrictions that might come or trade bans that would come with that, it's probably not a likely scenario, but it is in the plan. And obviously you would need BS approval for that. Something to note, they only cover the cost of the vaccine. They do not cover the cost of administering it. And well, one thing you have to look at is how many of your crews, vaccination crews, the potential of spreading it. And even though you're vaccinating, you have to continue to test to make sure there's no antigenic changes going on. And then also your premises in that control area are still subject to all the risk assessments, surveillance requirements, and biosecurity procedures. So again, most likely not, but any state wanting to consider vaccination would carefully have to judge whether or not that would be something they want to use along with those trade bans. And I head up mainly that section. Then 13 is another program or provision component that some states, especially Minnesota, may have used, especially in market age turkeys, is controlled marketing. This is where you have a low path AI premise that's in the control area and it is positive. And you then, with veterinary services and cooperating state agency discretion, you may try to continue to test that flock till it goes virus negative. And of course, that would make all the other farms in that area and the control area still have to do all the other testing and everything else. And then you'd have to wait till you're totally free of the virus, wait 7 days again before you process to slaughter. It has to be last poultry marketed during that week, and you have to make sure you're not exposing any other. Move that. Now, those controlled marketed poultry are not eligible for indemnity at all. You could be able to apply for compensation for some of the C&D virus elimination on premises or your conveyances. And I head up that section too. Finally, then, number 14 is education, and anything how important that is to distribute education outreach materials to a variety of people. When we have an outbreak, whether it's the public or our producers, we need to inform people about how to report sick birds and the public awareness message, especially emphasizing the fact that poultry and eggs are safe to eat, especially with the low path AI, even influenza that does not cause any human sickness at all. And then whether you have sick or dead backyard birds, how you can call that toll-free hotline number or use a BOA website to report those so we can respond to that. Or if you have 5 dead wild birds in your area, you can call DNR or go to their website for their sick or dead wildlife reporting. And for education, you look at Jeffrey out of ISPA or Denise from our BOA office. And that's kind of a very quick highlighted view, Becky, of our Indiana AI plan. And for more details, especially, you can look at our 34 pages along with our executive summary.
Thank you, Dr. Kopp, for walking us through that plan. Really appreciate that very comprehensive overview. I know it can be a lot of detail and not everybody on the call is going to be involved in every part of that, but I think it's really great to be able to see kind of how the whole system fits together. Questions for Dr. Kopp or any of us here at ISPA or the other staff members at BOA that were mentioned in his talk?
Yes, Rebecca, this is Dwayne Murphy.
Hello, Dr. Murphy.
And I apologize, I haven't turned my video on while I'm talking. There I did. I did have a question, and maybe we're going to cover this in more detail later. But regarding indemnities, I've got a couple of questions. The first one is, do we still need the DUNS and SAM numbers? And
because it's changing.
Oh, it's open. I'm unmuted.
This is Maria Cooper. So Yes, Dwayne, as of today, you still do need that DUNS number and it to be registered in the SAM system. I believe, I can't remember the exact date, but sometime in April, I believe, the federal government is switching to a unique identifier number. And so anyone who already has a DUNS number, I think, is going to have one of those unique identifier numbers. But I do have something that I can send to you, and Becky, I can provide it to you if you want to send it out afterwards. That kind of talks about that new unique identifier number that's just a little bit different, and I think perhaps simpler and more straightforward than the DUNS number. Does that
Okay,
help,
great.
Dr. Murphy?
Yeah.
Okay.
Now, that's probably what was causing my confusion. We had heard something about that. Yes. The next question I've got is, and again, maybe this isn't, I haven't read the agenda in detail, so I apologize, but if we find, going back to our outbreak, if we find a flock or a farm that's positive, at that time, we needed to get barn mortality and flock inventory information in order to start indemnity. Is that still the case, or what do we need to do to get indemnity going as quickly as possible? Has that changed?
So that has not changed either, Dr. Murphy. When you do have a suspect, if you could go ahead and collect those mortality logs, as soon as possible, that those numbers at the time that, we are initially notified will be the numbers that will be used to calculate the amount of indemnity. So USDA is only going to pay for birds that are alive and need to be depopulated. So if, we get delayed and we wait a couple of days and most of the flock is already dead, those birds will not be paid for. So the sooner that we can kind of document the mortality logs upon, having a suspect or clinical signs that are suspicious, the better.
Okay, and so as I recall, our company flock placement data and then photographs of the barn mortality data was adequate to serve those needs. Is that correct?
It certainly was, and I will also defer to Dr. Hines or others from USDA, since it really is their process, but I believe that is still the case. Angela, if you have any comments, please say so.
Can you hear me?
We
Yes.
can.
Okay, great. Yes, everything that you said is still required. Pictures are fine, because pictures, as long as we can read it, they can be converted to PDFs or even scanned. So pictures of the mortality logs, et cetera, is everything we're going to want right from the start. The sooner you can get that to us, the sooner we can get the processes going.
Okay. Thank you.
Mhm.
Thanks, Dr. Murphy. Any other questions? Okay. We'll move into the next part of our agenda is kind of talking through all the different state and federal agencies, at least the ones that have maybe the largest, earliest responsibilities and roles. And we're going to start off with the Indiana State Board of Animal Health. And I believe Dr. Brett Marsh is on the line, going to join us. Good morning, Dr. Marsh.
Hey, good morning to you all. And Becky, thank you for the opportunity to participate in your discussion here today. I'll be brief because you've heard a great deal from members of our team and will during the course of today's meeting. But I think it is important to have these continuing discussions, particularly in light of what we've diagnosed here on the continent in the last couple of weeks or so. It's important that we continue the dialogue, continue to prepare and be diligent. I'm continually struck also the fact that our state is the smallest state geographically west of the Appalachian Mountains, and yet we rank, as you all know, in a number of categories in the poultry industry, and therefore you can see where BOA is woven throughout this plan. The 14 components of this plan in collaboration with ISPA and our industry partners. There are a lot of other partners you'll hear from today as well. And I was, with Dr. Murphy's comments, I was hearkening back to 2016. And in addition to all these folks who worked so well together, to bring closure to the control area in a 38-day period of time, included not only state and federal agencies in collaboration with the industry, but I was also struck with the value of the local officials, local elected officials, the firefighters, the local newspapers, et cetera, local businesses that worked with this effort as well and understood the important role and the economic vitality that the poultry industry brought to their communities. So there are a lot of pieces and components to that. Dr. Kopp, again, has covered those pieces. It always strikes me that I think number 14 was communication, and there are days I think it should be the first component. Because that outreach and communication, just as we're doing today, making sure that we keep connected and keep those conversations going. I'm also struck with some of the foundational things that our Indiana industry has done, and I never want to miss an opportunity to thank the industry for premises registration. It sounds simple, and it may be, but boy, in these events, it is so critical, and that just that one component alone made a world of difference for us in 2016 to identify immediately how many sites commercially could be affected with this virus. As you're establishing these zones and beginning to get a sense of what the task might be, we had a small event, as has been reported in 2015, but in our commercial operations in 2016, after coming off of what the Upper Midwest experienced in 2015, how to avoid that. I think the prompt action by our industry at that time was really critical. Indiana is blessed not only with a widely diverse poultry industry, but we have strong leadership here. We have CEOs and company representatives who can make decisions on behalf of producers in this state, or if they're not resident in this state, they're not far away. I've worked with other catastrophic events in this state, and when the leadership is states and states away, or maybe even internationally, it makes it much more difficult to be responsive to these kinds of events. So having this strong leadership here, working closely with ISPA and others, it makes a world of difference when these things really come together. Dr. Kopp has talked about the various components, and you'll hear from Drs. Cooper and Shipman about various components of this plan, making sure that we have specific plans down to the premises level. I think that has also helped us a great deal, just knowing, so what is this your site and what do you plan to do on it? And we're happy to help move through that process and keep that communication moving forward. I think the other thing is also has been mentioned, and BOA takes very seriously as we lead an event like this with ISPA, is that inverted triangle that Dr. Kopp showed in his presentation. We've been in lots of meetings with discussions about what you do with the infected site at the bottom point of that triangle. And indeed, you have to deal with that site, the depopulation, the indemnity, et cetera. But I think it's critically important that all of us work together to not forget everybody else that's in that circle and elsewhere across the state as we maintain continuity of business. And we'll have to move through the process to deal with that infected site. But there are so many, and in this case, in 2016, we had dozens of other commercial sites in that control area that are trying to maintain business. And then, of course, we also knew that we had a significant industry out across our state, and we did deal with some trade restrictions, even amongst other states that wouldn't take product from, say, the northern part of the state when the event was taking place in southwestern Indiana. So all these pre-communications and efforts, the foundational piece, including these discussions here today, are really critical in this event. Continue to be diligent on biosecurity. I'm preaching to the choir here, of course, but it's really critical to be diligent day in and day out. We know these viruses exist in wild populations, and just being aware that at any time these could be introduced into our commercial operations. Just want to let you know fundamentally that BOA has your back, that we're here day in and day out, whether it's sick bird calls. Friday afternoon is when most of these calls come in, and so we're happy to respond to those, weekends, whatever it takes, and collaborating with all the partners, many of which you'll hear from today, and others out across the state that support this industry in so many ways. So Becky, thanks for the opportunity to provide a few comments. Keep up the good work. Just know that we're here and woven throughout this plan to support you day in and day out against an incursion of avian influenza. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Marsh. We very much echo your sentiments, and we're much stronger because of your staff, you and your staff and their dedication and just constant attention to the very last detail. And we very much appreciate you. Here at ISPA, I have my staff are a bit off camera. There they are. Work hard with our industry, and as we're talking about communication, really, we're one of those key, just kind of, a center there for folks to reach out and try to get people connected with the right folks, and do our best to support all aspects of the industry. We, reach into those small flocks as well. We join you here this morning from the Creighton Hall of Animal Sciences on the Purdue University campus. And, with the power of that land grant university, in whether it's just a question on an average day, or we're, in the middle of an incident, we can reach out and help pull in some of the expertise we have here. We're very blessed to have the Purdue Animal Disease Diagnostic Laboratory and that staff here and down in Southern Indiana at the Hickey Lab as well. So really here to help collaborate and build cooperation amongst the industry. Certainly know from past experience and even from some current experience how important it is to work together, kind of only as strong as your neighbor in these kinds of situations. So really appreciate your support. And I see Director Bruce Kettler from our Indiana State Department of Agriculture has joined us. And Bruce, I know in past incidents, the Indiana State Department of Agriculture has always been a great help in being there for us and bringing folks together. So thanks for being with us this morning.
Thank you, Becky, and thanks to everyone. I'll be very brief. I just, first I want to say, listening to Dr. Kopp and these pieces is wow. I mean, what I've thought of several times is in many ways, it's too bad that the consuming public doesn't see what all you folks do and all the folks that are involved from, federal down to local, in making sure that this is done right, and more importantly, their food is safe. And I want to thank all of you. I think this is just a great example of many that I see in our great industry of people preparing, understanding what they need to get done, diligent about their work to make sure that the food supply is safe, that our animals are taken care of properly and appropriately. And I just commend everybody for participating in this. I'll echo a little bit of what Dr. Marsh said. I think from a State Department of Agriculture, as all of you probably know, we're really not deeply involved, particularly in this space on the regulatory side. That's not our function, our role. There are others that do that. But I would say that, as he mentioned, the last part of this plan here, education, I would put communication as part of that, is critical. And when we get into these kinds of situations, I foresee ISDA as being hopefully a strong assistant to everybody involved to make sure that the communication and education get out there, whether that's across the street here at the State House, whether that's with our public, working alongside all of the partners that you see listed here. That's what we're here. So we stand ready to help by all means. As I said, whether that's working with locals, with political folks, frankly, even other state departments of ag. So in my role, have a lot of conversations with my counterparts and their staff in other states. And anytime if we were to get into a large scale situation, we of course through USDA and others have to be mindful of our neighbors and make sure that they're aware of what happens. And so that's another role that we have. So I would just sum it up to say that we're going to let you folks at ISPA, Board of Animal Health and others, if we get into these situations, I think our role is to really be play a backdoor role, if you will, stand in the background a little bit, to let you all focus on the pieces that are super critical and let us kind of work on some of the other things that are still important, but not as critical as the work that has to be done as is outlined in this plan. So we want to make sure that we're doing what we can to make that happen and stand ready at all times to do so. Thanks, Becky.
Thank you, Bruce. And yes, it's just so very important to know. I have every confidence that you are there when we need it, when we need you. So thanks for being there, and really appreciate the comment about the other states, because as we've seen with these incidents, the wild birds don't seem to pay attention to our state boundaries. So we definitely need those connections and partnerships.
Kaufman, call on Park 1.
Next up to join us is Dr. Angela Hines. She's based here in Indianapolis with the USDA-APHIS Veterinary Services. Thank you, Dr. Hines, for joining us this morning.
Good morning. Thank you. I'm so happy to be here today and discuss our role in the event of an AI outbreak. So I'm Dr. Angela Hines. I'm the area veterinarian in charge for USDA Veterinary Services here in Indiana. And as far as our role, I did get to participate when I was a veterinary medical officer with avian influenza here in Indiana in 2016, which was quite an experience. I also had experience in Minnesota in 2015. So definitely interested in trying to work through the processes and make everything happen smoothly and get us out of the situation. So as far as our role, we're dedicated to a collaborative partnership with the Indiana State Board of Animal Health, the Indiana State Poultry Association, and many of the industry partners and other partners. I can't even list them all. But during the outbreak, the USDA shares a financial burden in regards to assisting with the disease control and eradication to assist the companies and the producers. So compensating affected producers and their partners in some of the losses will help us restore production as fast as possible. So what do we cover? The USDA will compensate for individual birds that must be destroyed using species-specific calculators. We also pay for some of the other losses, such as eggs that must be destroyed, and we pay a standard amount for virus elimination activities such as C&D, cleaning and disinfection. Locally, how do we help in that first 72 hours? So as the area veterinarian in charge, I facilitate and initiate phone conversations with USDA district offices as well as the national offices, communicate with USDA avian health staff, and we have poultry specialists there as well. Communication with BOA, state labs, industry, our potential response in that first 72 hours, I feel a lot of times is really critical. So locally, I would try to provide the staff that would be requested by Dr. Marsh, and that would include anything from veterinary medical officers to animal health technicians. And again, we would assist in a variety of different ways. We can assist with conducting surveillance, which we initially did when we had that AI outbreak in 2016, but we can also do many other things. We can assist with biosecurity, depopulation. But one of the bigger roles that we will play in a more long-term type of setting with dealing with the outbreak will be to provide case managers and field reimbursement specialists. So we train USDA staff to work one-on-one with producers to navigate them through the indemnity process as well as the reimbursement process. So I mentioned the role of the case manager, which is actually very important. So they serve as a liaison and a USDA single point of contact with that producer. And whether or not it's multiple sites for that one producer, we will have one case manager per producer. The case manager also serves as a source of information for the producer. They coordinate costs related to depop disposal, discuss virus elimination options, again, along with BOA. And we also provide environmental sampling, again, trying to get this resolved as soon as possible. We also go over the critical documentation requirements, and there are a lot of documents, both for the producers, companies, and even on our ends. And making sure that documentation is completed correctly makes everything go so much faster. We monitor and report everything until that premise is released from quarantine. Case managers also work with our field reimbursement specialists, contracting officers, and the contracting officer piece has even become more important since 2015 too. But finding contracting officers to make sure that we're spending on contractors is actually getting done. And it was found out pretty much in 2015 and in 16. Much money as they could buy services that we wanted. So case manager working in contact in connection with the field reimbursement specialists, as well as contracting officer representatives for these sites will make everything hopefully go very smooth and have more cost efficient methods for getting everything done. We also provide site evaluations, help establish biosecurity in the event, we don't have site managers. And in a situation where we may be dealing with a small outbreak, maybe, you're just dealing with local USDA staff, but in cases where we have a really large outbreak, one of the things that we can do is get other staff from other state, meaning veterinary medical officers, animal health technicians, and this is all conducted through a incident command team system through the USDA, again, a national effort to assist in controlling the outbreak. So that is all I had. I think I had one more note I wanted to say, 4 weeks. Oh, so indemnity payments. One of the things we find out is it's important for the producer or even the company to let us know within 4 weeks if they have not received their payment, because these payments are done through direct deposit. And if there's a problem, we don't know that they didn't get it. And there's occasionally been problems. Even when I was dealing with Newcastle disease in California, had a producer that just wasn't getting paid and kept having problems. I can't remember what it was at the time. I don't know if it was his banking routing or with his SAMs or DUNS or something, but that does happen. So again, paying attention so that we can get the money to the producers as soon as possible. And again, we're available during peacetime for any planning for AI emergency planning. And I guess that's all I have to say if there's any questions.
Thank you, Dr. Hines. And we will do our very best to be ready for those first 72 hours, but definitely there are a lot of days and things we get to just say, okay, we just, USDA will be there. So thank you for all you do. Kind of so much of it is there kind of in the background, but being there, we know when we need you. Questions for Dr. Hines?
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. I'm going to move. The next group up is the Indiana Department of Homeland Security. I did have them confirm that they were coming, but I'm not seeing them on the list of participants. If there is somebody from Homeland Security, can you identify yourself? If not, I have the same kind of issue with Department of Health. I had a confirmation, but I'm not seeing the person on the screen. Is there anyone there from Department of Health? All right. All right. Okay, well, we'll move on then to the Indiana Department of Environmental Management. I have definitely seen some of my former coworkers on here, and Julia Wickard, almost called you doctor there, almost earned a PhD, Julia. I believe Julia was with us earlier. There she is. All right, we'll pin you. Good morning. Thanks for being with us.
Hi, Becky, and hi, Team Ag. It's good to see everybody on here. And I certainly would echo Director Kettler and Dr. Marsh's comments. We certainly do things uniquely in Indiana and appreciate the esprit de corps that kind of happens across the public and private sectors of agriculture. And so I am excited that we, as the Indiana Department of Environmental Management, can be on the call. And Becky, appreciate your leadership in the role. and have several of my colleagues here within the agency that would have response duties and roles and responsibilities. And so as the agricultural liaison, I'm kind of the link, if you will, to the agricultural community, to producer groups, to farmers themselves within the Indiana Department of Environmental Management. But we have kind of the boots on the ground folks in our Office of Land Quality specifically that are on the call. And I thought it would be appropriate to kind of make those introductions. And to do that, I'm going to call on my colleague, Corey Webb. Corey serves as the Deputy Assistant Commissioner in the Office of Land Quality at IDEM and manages the permitting and compliance programs that have oversight over animal agriculture here in and at IDEM. So probably the best way to do this, Becky, virtually is I'll just introduce Corey, and then hopefully the staff that would have roles and responsibilities can come on. We can make facial recognition, if you will, so we can put face and names together. And then the role that IDEM would play, certainly we serve as a technical advisor to the Board of Animal Health, to the State Poultry Association, to USDA, however we can help from an environmental standpoint, that would be our role. So, but it's so good. Again, Becky, thank you for coordinating today's program. And I look forward to the day when we can all sit in a room together, unmasked, and enjoy one another's company like it used to be, right? I'm not sure we'll ever see that day, but I can hope and pray that we do see that day. So at this time, I want to introduce my colleague, Corey Webb, the Deputy Assistant Commissioner in the Office of Land Quality. Thanks, Becky.
Thank you, Julia, and good morning, everyone. Thank you for the introduction, Julia and Becky. I will echo what Julia said. We do appreciate your including us on this. We stand by to help in any incident, however we can. We recognize that our role is a technical role, and that, I mean, broken down to the most simplest way to think about it, we permit confined feeding operations, and in that respect, we're most interested in the manure management structures. We also permit landfills who can accept certain types of waste. So for the boots on the ground, I guess, portion of that, we've got several, that spreads across several portions of the Office of Land Quality. So we have Brian Smith and Andy Stinchfield on from emergency response, and those gentlemen can speak to how we can assist from a technical standpoint and from emergency response perspective if there is an incident. I've also got Amy McClure on. She's our section chief for the solid waste permitting program. She can speak to the waste management options piece. We do have some information about available landfills that IDEM permits who will be able to help in this sort of a situation. And finally, I've also got Charlie Grady on, and he can speak to the compliance support piece. If there is an incident like this, our compliance section is happy to work with producers so that we can get done what needs to get done. So without further ado, I'll go ahead and introduce either Brian or Andy from emergency response. Either one of you can speak to the ER perspective, please.
Well, this is Andy Stinchfield. I don't have my video isn't working so well, but I'll go ahead and let Brian get started. I didn't know if he was going to jump in or not, but we'll go ahead and let Brian get started and we were both at the incident in 2016. I think, one of the things I think Brian's going to go into more detail, but what I'd like to say is, we respond to environmental emergencies and things like that. But one of our other skills, our skill sets is for the whole state is to help manage large scale incidents. So we can fall into any role in these incidents, whether it be in operations, logistics, boots on the ground. You've got a plan to accomplish, and we're pretty good in emergency response about getting whatever the situation is plan done, whether it's bird flu, COVID, floods, tornadoes. We help manage large scale incidents for the state, and Brian's kind of going to maybe give you a better detail how that works and how that's set up.
I think you're muted, Brian.
And while he's unmuting, I will say that Brian and Andy were just, nope, can't hear you. But I did for a second. Try it again. Nope. All right, now, but it looks like you're red. So hit the button again. There you go. How about that? Let's see. Let's see if there's a, I don't know if I remove. Have him, okay. Why don't you try to unplug your headphones and try it? That's the suggestion we're getting. Maybe, oh, and now you're still on red. Try to untoggle. Okay, now.
Can
How
you
about
hear me
now?
now?
Oh, yes, yay. Yes, thank
Okay.
you.
All right. Hey, if you can hear me, Andy, thank you for that summary and thank you for your confidence in what you think my ability is to explain this. But Andy did a nice summary there for what the IDEM emergency response section can do. I personally have some computer issues to deal with based on my age maybe, but I would like to first start out just by thanking everybody for actually all the pre-planning. I'm a big proponent of pre-planning. It really does make incidents go a lot smoother. And in this particular incident, like in 2016 at Jasper, you got to recognize that the locals and we're on our own for the first 48 hours before you're really going to get any federal assistance or any boots on the ground from our federal counterparts. So we plan Andy and I emergency response. We focus on the initial. We're kind of the tip of the spear type to get in there and try to help coordinate things and manage things. So yeah, that I don't know if I'm getting off track there, but during the 2016 when I had the pleasure of sitting down there with Cheryl Miller with Board of Animal Health, and I was just very impressed with all of the BOA staff and everybody. It was a bad situation, and I mean, on the second day, we probably had 250 boots on the ground. That's a lot to manage. There's a lot of liability there. It was not a good situation. So IDEM is a tool that other state agencies are welcome to tap into. You'd have to get permission from senior management to deploy us or to use us, but we try to keep up to speed on NIMS. I hope you guys recognize that the federal counterparts are all obligated under National Incident Management System. So they're going to send an incident management team down on these big scenarios. And that's where IDEM can plug in there and try to coordinate getting other people plugged into those scenarios. So we need to have a common language standardization, makes all that go smooth. And it all comes down to the bottom of money. You have to have good documentation to get reimbursed for anything. So if a disaster is declared, we all need to have very good documentation that we were compliant in the NIMS and that. So I'm available for questions. I'm not trying to take over your workshop, and I'm just sitting there just learning things like everybody else.
Thank you, Brian. And again, thanks to Brian and Andy for being there in 2016. And Brian brings up a great point. There are lots of free training videos that you can access within the federal system to make sure that you understand that emergency response and communication system. And I know that's something that it's been a while, but I've invested some time in, and I definitely see as an important part of kind of everybody spending a little bit of time in there and understanding that system can really help. All right, let's see. Get back So let's see, who is up next from the IDEM group?
I believe it would be Amy McClure, Becky.
All right. There she is.
Hi, Becky. Good morning.
Good morning, Amy.
It's always nice to see you, even virtually. Hi, everyone else. My name is Amy McClure. As Corey mentioned, I'm the Solid Waste Permits Section Chief. And the permits branch at OLQ is responsible for permitting landfills. So our role is essentially to serve as a communication link between the producers and the landfills. So there are about 30 landfills approximately that would be likely or potential candidates to accept waste from a mortality event. So in order to assess suitability and willingness of those landfills, IDEM's Office of Land Quality performs a yearly suitability study. We do a survey, and the survey consists of asking a series of questions that, such as like the approximate number of animal carcass the facility could dispose of on a daily basis, the staging capacity, location within the landfill where they would be filling, the method and manner of disposal, and that type of question. Landfills are dynamic businesses. So the areas of waste disposal within the landfill footprint and the anticipated capacity to accept today might not be the same next week or next month. So when an event like were actually to take place. So this survey is important to do kind of on a annual basis. That's why we do it annually. However, the suitability survey provides two main purposes. First, it allows us as the permitter to have a conversation with the landfill owners about this topic, AI, but other mortality events that might happen, just making them aware of this potential waste stream and providing feedback and answering questions about permitting impacts they might have or other concerns. So this year, Becky and I were able to coordinate schedules well enough with one of the landfill owners, and she was able to join me on the call as a subject matter expert on AI, which was helpful, I thought. And that way she could address any specific concerns the landfill owner might have in accepting that particular waste stream. Secondly, the survey allows us to understand the willingness of the owners to accept the waste should an event occur. So whereas landfills are permitted to accept the waste from a mortality event, they're not compelled to do so. There may be operational reasons that they don't want to accept the waste, and in some cases, local ordinances have been passed to discourage the acceptance of this type of waste. So we have to be aware of that type of thing. We performed the suitability study this year in the fall. We started the process at the end of September, and we wrapped it up around mid-November. The takeaway is that landfilling remains a viable option in the event of a mortality, occurs, but as generally the case, it's not the only solution for disposal that producers would need, but it is a portion of that solution. Of the 30 or so landfills that were identified as potential candidates for acceptance, 14 or so, roughly half of the landfills responded to our request to speak with them to do the survey. And I can share, if I have permission to share my screen.
I think you should. If that doesn't work, I think I have it.
It says hold control. Let's see.
Oh, she got it.
Okay, I think I'm sharing now.
You
Can you all see it? Okay. So of the 14 or so roughly landfills that responded, this is a very general map of where those landfills are located within the state. So you can get a general idea of where you might be located in relationship to a landfill that would be willing to accept that type of waste. Let me, there, maybe that's, so anyway, we had follow-up conversations with representatives of each facility. And as I mentioned earlier, we just answered questions and we got general ideas of capacity. And this is the result for at least, the foreseeable future. And that is all that I wanted to share today. So if anyone has any questions, you're welcome to ask me. Otherwise, I'll just pass it on to the next item person. Thank you.
Thank you, Amy, and really appreciate you reaching out and working with the landfills to kind of conduct that annual survey. And I know we've had a new company come on, so there are definitely some new counties lit up on that map, and that's great to just have some more options. Just appreciate you keeping that on the to-do list and keeping that line of communication open. So important that the facilities are comfortable, that IDEM, that they're responsible having that compliance with that permit is comfortable with, the operations and accepting this waste. So appreciate your connection there.
Thank you.
I want to second that, and we thank IDEM for working with the landfills. We had a major mortality event last summer associated with loss of power and heat, and it was very helpful having a local landfill that was willing to take those mortalities. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Murphy. Always good to hear. All right, who's up next from the item? Maybe Charlie Grady?
Yes.
Is that right?
Hello. My name's
There he
Charles
is.
Grady, and I'm with the CFO compliance group. And I guess our role when it comes to avian influenza is mainly to stay out of the way of the response. And we'll probably maintain very little inspection efforts in the poultry industry during that time, just to assure that biosecurity is at its maximum, at least as far as my inspectors are concerned. We do assist with some of the response issues. If there's a question on site about management of mortalities at the production area, we often help ER find the answer or give them the answer if we are able to figure it out. So that's pretty much our role when it comes to avian influenza outbreaks. So.
Thank you, Charles. And I think one of the roles that our producers always appreciate that the compliance staff can help, and the permittees as well, can help fill there is just that, your presence and just kind of involvement there, and kind of having a little bit of observation can just give folks some, comfort that things are okay. And it's always nice to have you there.
We're always
seen
here
a
to
lot
help.
of things. Okay, thank you. All right, Corey, I'll go back to you.
Thanks again, Becky. I believe that's all we have to add from an IDEM perspective. We appreciate you including us in this, and when an incident does arise, like I said, if there are any questions, just feel free to reach out directly to myself or to Julia, and we can put you in touch with who you need to speak with.
Thank you, Corey, and to everyone there at IDEM. Questions for the IDEM staff?
I'm probably taking up too much time today, and I apologize.
No, we're happy to have you, Doc Murphy.
It's my understanding that Indiana is looking at making shallow burial of carcasses acceptable under certain situations. I was wondering if they wanted to expand any on that.
I know Kyle Shipman's going to talk about that in detail in our section later.
Okay, then we can just wait for that.
Okay.
Yeah, Dr. Murphy, I'm happy to talk about that later.
Great, thank you.
But good question. So, and I know Kyle has visited with IDEM about it, so it's good. All right, well, thank you all. We appreciate you being there. Next up is Mitch Marcus. He's with us from the Department of Natural Resources. Appreciate you being here with us today and all you do to kind of keep an eye on the skies for us here at Indiana.
Well, thank you, Becky. Can you hear me all right?
We can.
Good. First, I want to thank state and industry partners for including us in this conversation and webinar today. I am now in charge of our Fish and Wildlife Health Program for the DNR. I should have on the call Adam Phelps, our waterfowl biologist, who is located in our Bloomington field office. We now also have a South Fish and Wildlife Health biologist, Michelle Westrich. She sits out of our Bloomington field office, and then our North Fish and Wildlife Health biologist on the call should be Elisa Raleigh, and she's located here in Indianapolis with myself. I wanted to talk briefly about wild bird surveillance and then our communication efforts. So as most of you that were around in the 15 and 16 outbreak, you would know that DNR was involved in both wild bird surveillance and in communication efforts. We have historically participated in Mississippi Flyway, mainly hunter harvested bird surveillance for avian influenza, and then we routinely monitor sick and dead wild birds and submit those carcasses to 2 labs, principally ADDL at Purdue and the National Wildlife Health Center. And AI testing is standard for both those labs. And then we typically on the communication front work with partners to communicate to DNR customers. And that is principally through routine communication channels, which would be news releases, targeted emails, and or wild bulletins. With our hunting seasons coming to a close for the year, I would anticipate that we would work to include AI information prior to next hunting season for our waterfowl hunting customers. And we can consider, as AI continues to be found in North America, outreach efforts to wildlife rehabilitators, falconers, and or game breeders.
All right, thank you, Mitch. Let's see here. And we've been listening to reports out of USDA has been talking. There have been some weekly calls that a good number of us have been on, and really talking about the wildlife surveillance, just across the U.S., across Canada, and just really appreciate your presence there and participation. So, questions for folks at DNR?
I'm sorry again.
We're actually paying Dr. Murphy to ask questions, keep it alive. Yeah.
So we've been hearing a lot about wild bird surveillance in the Atlantic Flyway. Do we know anything about the status of birds in the Mississippi Flyway?
Adam, are you on and want to take that one?
I am on, although on my screen I'm showing up as Matt Simmons, incidentally, so I'm not sure what that's about. I'm really Adam. I'm not Matt, I promise. Status in the Mississippi Flyway? No, we really don't. I don't know of any states that are doing routine surveillance of hunter harvested birds at this time. Every time we've done it, at least in Indiana, has been with Wildlife Services, USDA money, footing that bill. We haven't done any routine surveillance except for found dead reported birds. We haven't done hunter harvested surveys or harvested birds in several years. And I don't know of any other states in the Mississippi Flyway that are, or the Central Flyway for that matter.
And I'll just add, Dr. Murphy, you're probably aware that the bulk of the flyway sampling so far in 2021 was focused on the Atlantic Flyway and the Pacific Flyway. And my understanding is there are now some ongoing discussions on whether there's enough time and effort and money available to expand into either the Mississippi and or Central Flyways for additional testing.
Thank you.
Good question, and thanks for that feedback. That's maybe we'll need to pursue that a little bit. We certainly want to know what's going on in our own flyway. So any other questions for DNR? Thanks for being there, and we appreciate your participation here today. We did hear back from the Department of Homeland Security, and they promise they're there for us when we need them. However, they managed to double book themselves, and so they're not going to be here with us this morning, but I did at least make that connection. So that brings us to the end of the first kind of portion of our meeting, our webinar here this morning with our state and federal agencies. All the folks from the state and federal agencies, you are very welcome to stay on with us for the remainder of the webinar, but we also want to respect your time. So if you need to move on to other things, one last call for questions. Anyone have questions for any of the folks that we've heard from this morning? The board of health folks will continue to be with us in the next hour. Well, please know that all of us are very appreciative of our supporting state and federal agencies. You really are very key in us. You know, we do our very best to be ready, but we really appreciate you knowing you're there for us. If you have any questions for us or any materials you'd like to share with our producers, please just forward those to me and I'll make sure those get distributed. So how about we take a break? It is 10:54 by my watch here. Not a real long break, but we'll try to come back right at 11. So just a quick break for everybody, and then we'll start on our producer side. Thank you.
Becky, I hope it's okay that I went ahead and shared my screen.
Thank you, Dr. Cooper. Yep, that's just fine. And it's, yeah, 11 o'clock here. So, yeah, welcome back to part 2, producer preparedness. And we'll start with Drs. Maria Cooper and Kyle Shipman, and a little bit from me here and there, and Dr. Jeff Lossy. Just going to work through kind of what you need to be doing. And I think I'll just let Maria start with it. I don't know that it exactly follows the agenda, and that is just fine. So thank you, Dr. Cooper.
You're welcome, Becky, and you were correct. I went a little rogue, and I'm sorry I discussed it with Dr. Kopp and Dr. Shipman and Dr. Lossy yesterday, but I picked up on one of the topics, letter D, permitted movement, to speak to that just a little bit, as well as I'm going to cover barcoding for Dr. Lossy. So I have 8 slides, and I struggled to figure out what order to put them in because it's kind of one of those, which comes first, the chicken or the egg, no pun intended, or maybe pun intended. So I'm going to start with this graphic. So as Dr. Kopp mentioned, when we identify our first positive or any positive case, we are immediately going to look at some areas and zones. And so generally our first step is that 10-kilometer or 6.2 mile control area. And within that control area, all susceptible species, so all poultry premises in this case, would be quarantined. And then if they need to move poultry or poultry products, whether within that circle, out of that circle, or into that circle, there are steps that have to be met. And so what I try to reassure everyone of is that there's a lot of names for control or areas and zones, and you don't need to memorize all of them. And how big they are and what shape they are is going to depend on the geography, the density of the area. Is there a big processing plant near the edge, et cetera, et cetera. So basically, when a diagnosis occurs, we will tell you, the companies and producers will let you know you're in this area or zone and what that means. Does that mean I need to test, just on a weekly basis, but otherwise I'm not quarantined? Does that mean that I am quarantined? So we will help you understand what area or zone you're in and what that means for you. And so for an individual company, you may have premises in multiple zones. And so what we'll do is we'll send you a list and say, well, here are, these premises, they're in a control area. This is what they need to do. Here's your next group of premises that are in this zone, and this is what they need to do. So we will definitely help interpret that. So you don't have to remember, which zone or area I'm in and what that means. We'll help you do that. The reason that there's 2 versions up here of a control area is just to show that they don't have to be perfect circles. So again, if there's some type of geographic boundary, whether it's a forest or a river or a county line or whatever, it does not have to be a perfect circle. So again, we will determine that, in the incident command as an incident occurs. Let's see. There we go. The only way that we can effectively give you that list and tell you with confidence which of your premises are in which area or zone and what they need to do is to make sure that all premises are registered and that they are definitely registered to the address of the actual birds and not to the residence of the producer or the company main headquarters, etc. Fortunately, for every company that I see on the participant list, we have worked together to make sure that, as we register premises, that indeed there is, a layer or a duck or a turkey or a broiler barn at those locations. So we use county parcel records and other types of GIS tools to assure that we are at the right spot. But it is extremely common, particularly when registering new locations, that we'll be given coordinates here and they're like, well, this is where it's located, and I will plug in those coordinates and it's like, well, no, this is a suburban neighborhood in Utah or the desert of Kazakhstan, so I don't feel like your poultry are located here, and we are sure to correct that. But just, you know, the most important thing is that on for any new barns or houses, for any changes in producers. So if, you know, if father sold it to son or someone else moved in and took over, those name changes, any barns that or houses that no longer contract with you, producers that no longer contract or out of business, keeping us up to date on those so that we have accurate information at the time of an incident and don't need to try to be dealing with those types of updates when we also have 100 other things to try to be doing to contain a disease. So I recommend at least annually, and fortunately between Jeffrey and Chelsea at ISPA, you know, when Jeffrey is good about pulling the list for each company annually, and Chelsea, you know, takes it when she makes her farm visits, and a lot of people will say, like, who do I send the info to? You know, do I send it to ISPA or BOA or both? You're welcome to send direct to me. I'll be making the changes, but Jeffrey and Chelsea and I work as one. We use the same database, so we're not, you know, maintaining two different lists. So whoever you get it to will make it happen. While at least annually, I think every 6 months probably makes sense. It's interesting, after the 2016 event down in southern Indiana, those companies have a tendency to update very frequently, even if, you know, a couple of shingles came off the roof. They love snow. No, I'm kidding. But it's good. I think they realize the value of having the premises data correct and without question, that way that they can get their list and get going if they end up in an area or a zone. So as often as you'd like, I will take updates, but at least once a year. And most of you already have spreadsheets that you maintain that have the types of information we need, which is primarily producer name, address, production type, number of houses, maximum capacity of birds, and some contact information. So usually we can adapt to whatever you send. If you don't currently have an Excel document or you're looking to update one, we do have a template that I can send you that has the columns of information that we are most interested in making sure that we have updated. So just let me know, and I'm happy to send you that blank Excel document with column labels. So this, I will mention this particular circle that I pulled. This is actually a 10-mile, not a 10-kilometer zone. And it included all livestock farms. So there's actually 768 dots on this map. And I know I've seen a few names from Maple Leaf today. The center of this circle is actually the Maple Leaf Global Headquarters in Leesburg, Indiana. I pulled this as an example some time ago, I think, when I met with them, so I used it today, just in case you recognized your aerial view and the amount of livestock that's in this region of the state. So once we do make sure that your premises are all validated and up to date, we want to make sure that barcode files are generated. So barcodes are used definitely during an incident, but we encourage barcodes to be used for diagnostic samples going to labs at any point. So I encourage their use on a regular basis. However, it's really a non-negotiable during a disease event that these will be used. So basically, I can do this for you. I've done it for many companies. If we go through your premises and you just say, can you send me an updated barcode file? Happy to do it. There's also a website, and I can send these instructions, which you see on the left of this slide. It's actually through the National Pork Board. However, they link to the federal allocator, so any premises, whether it has swine on it or not, is in this system. So basically, you put in what you believe to be the 7-digit federal premises ID. It comes up with an address, and you say, yes, that's the address I think it should be. And if that's the case, then you choose what size of barcodes you want, and you can even put a name above them. So if you see in the upper right-hand corner here, I made one for Cooper's Cockerels. So it's nice to have a name on there too, although it's not mandatory. So these stickers then, basically you get a PDF document like you see in the middle with all these barcodes on them. You load labels, sticky labels, in your printer at your office, And these will print out then on little mailing type sticker labels. And there's multiple sizes. Definitely don't want to do the big ones. There's only so much space on a submission form where you'll need to put them. So they go on the submission form for that premises. And they also, it's great if you can put your samples into, like your tubes of samples into plastic baggies, and then put barcodes on the outside of those plastic baggies too. And this is extra important if you are sampling multiple farms as part of surveillance sampling or sampling in order to be able to move birds or bird products. It's important that if you're shipping from multiple farms, that they are very well separated in the shipping container. So every farm really needs to be a separate accession. And I think Jeff Lassie will probably talk on this. You can't put samples from 3 farms on the same submission form. They all need to be separate, and they need to be with their individual barcode label on them. So again, you can make those. I can help you make those and send you the file for printing. Just reach out and let me know. But we, you know, when labs or samples arrive at the laboratory, they have to be 100% confident of which premises they came from. And I think that they probably would not test any that did not have a premises ID barcode on them, or they weren't able to validate the premises ID, because if one comes back positive in all the samples that day, and we don't know which farm it goes to, no one in the circle gets to move that day. So it's very critical that these make them onto the submission forms and on the outside of plastic bags containing samples. I think some people have affixed them to the tube. I find that because of the condensation on the outsides of tubes, I'm not sure they stick very well, but maybe Jeff can speak to that. So in terms of permitted movement, then again, everyone in that control area, if you want to move any birds into that control area, within the control area, or out of the control area, that movement has to be permitted, because again, those farms would all be under quarantine. So for different species and different products, and even different destination states, if moving out of state, the requirements will differ. However, there's kind of some very minimum requirements that's going to be true for basically all birds and all products. And so those things are listed here. The traceability information has to be available. So you have to have a federal premises ID. We have to be sure that the geocoordinates have been validated and land on that poultry barn, and that, you know, we've validated that parcel information. There's generally always enhanced biosecurity measures that have to be met. And again, the details of each of these, and I'll have a slide on this here in a moment, are all in the secure poultry supply plan. And so they go through the types of testing that has to be met, the types of surveillance in terms of observational surveillance or unexplained mortality, biosecurity measures, whether it's, you know, the truck and driver biosecurity. For eggs, there is a 2-day hold period whereby even if you sampled the birds and got negative results that day, you can only move eggs that day that were laid 2 days ago. So lots of different requirements for different types of birds and different types of products. And they're all detailed in that secure poultry supply plan. The EPI information has to be acceptable. And by that, I mean, you know, if you are a farm in the control area and we just learned that you received birds yesterday from a farm that is now positive, you know, that's not going to be acceptable, because we're going to need to do some more thorough testing and traceability to make sure that indeed the farm is negative before movement occurs. The destination premises and the destination state have to both be willing to accept the poultry and the poultry products. And so we did run into this during 2016 where, you know, in Indiana, the requirements from our standpoint, we felt were met and we felt comfortable with a movement, but a destination state was not comfortable with that movement and turned down movement of the product. So, and not only, you know, basically, so let's say we're shipping something to Ohio. Not only does that Ohio destination say it's a plant, the plant has to be willing, as well as the state veterinarian's office. And so it could be that one is okay with it. Say the state veterinarian says, yep, you know, Indiana is following the secure poultry supply plan. They have met all the requirements. We trust they're doing everything right, but the plant might say, you know, we're not going to take that risk. And alternatively, it could be different, or the reverse. You know, the plant in Ohio may really need that product, but the state veterinarian is not comfortable accepting. So we do need to make sure that both the destination premises and the destination state veterinarian are willing to accept those products. And then perhaps most importantly is that there's no evidence of infection based on both clinical signs as well as testing, which generally has to occur within 24 hours of the movement. So if you just Google, and I hope most or all of you are familiar with the Secure Poultry Supply Plan, if you just Google Secure Poultry Supply, you will come to their main website, and on the front page, there is a piece that says search for permit guidance. And so you can search by species, by product, etc. And again, the most probably confusing one to wrap your head around is probably eggs, just because of the 2-day hold and because of how often they often have to move unless there's you know, plenty of storage on farm, and that the movement doesn't have to occur that often. But generally, that's going to be the one that is the most complicated. But again, I encourage you to think about all of the different products or birds that your company would need to ship during an event, and pull the guidance documents for each one of those and read through all the requirements and determine what you need to do ahead of time to be ready to meet those. If you need to power wash, you know, the truck moving on and off the farm, which is likely, you know, do you have those supplies? Do you have enough disinfectant that is, you know, an active ingredient that's going to work against avian influenza? You know, do you have enough swabs and broth stockpiled and those types of things? And I'll take the opportunity here to say that, you know, we received a lot of praise for how our 2016 event was handled. And certainly the Board of Animal Health and all of our partner agencies had put a lot of time into preparedness and being ready for this. But I will say that I personally, and I know others on our team, really credit a large portion of the success to the companies that were involved, because they had done a tremendous amount of preparedness, and I'm sure even more now, but a tremendous amount of preparedness to be ready to go out and sample all farms in the control area overnight. That takes a lot of pre-planning and effort, and they made a lot of hard decisions, and they made them very quickly, and they made very aggressive decisions. So I don't want anyone to feel too comfortable that, you know, BOA and ISPA and all of our partner agencies, we got this. I mean, we absolutely have your back, like Dr. Marsh says, but we also, I just don't want anyone to feel comfortable that, oh, we, you know, BOA will handle it in the time, because the success from 2016 was so much of it was really attributed to the companies and their aggressive response and preparedness ahead of time. A couple of slides ago, you saw the permit that we currently plan to use. There continues to be national progress on trying to make systems that really would work across all states, but we're frankly just not there. So our plan today, if we diagnosed avian influenza today, is that we would use this PDF permit that many of you may be familiar with. It's pretty simple and straightforward. Again, the biggest piece of permitted movement are all those guidances or all those requirements that have to be met that you can look at on the Secure Poultry Supply website. But the actual transfer of information in terms of the actual request is this one-page PDF document that should be filled out for, or will have to be filled out for every movement. And so it's pretty simple: origin information, destination information at the top. If the address is not the physical address of the animals, or the premises ID is put on there wrong, or an application date is, there are shipment dates were too far in advance or whatever, we will absolutely notice, and it'll get sent back for redo. But pretty basic information about where things are moving from and moving to. The middle section just details what type of poultry and how many or much of that product. the purpose of movement, and there are drop downs that have things specific to the poultry industry, but there's also an option to describe others. So if for whatever reason, and I think we did run into this when we were permitting the movement of compost material, it was maybe not listed as one of the products. So you can describe what you're actually moving and the reason why. And then test information. So we need to know, when did you collect the samples that were for this premises for things that need to move? What was the AI result, which there is both a positive and a negative in that drop down, but if you're choosing positive, your permit will be denied. What is the accession number at the laboratory, and what lab was it run at? Presumably Purdue ADDL. That's unless they somehow don't have the capacity. Unless that's the case, we need really all samples to go to Purdue, because we have that direct link and know that we can get results back in a time that is reasonable and will allow movement of products within that kind of 24-hour to 48 in some cases of when sampling needs to be done. So I remember distinctly, and I probably shouldn't talk about him because I don't think he's here to defend himself, but when we were talking about this preparedness in 14 and 15, Roger Sager said, so are you telling me that, what are we going to do when we need to move on a Sunday? Are you telling me you're going to approve permits on a Sunday night? And yes, absolutely. And I don't think he believed us until it happened, but you all need to move product every day. We're going to work around the clock to make sure that that happens. That is just how it goes. So wanted you to not fear that if there is a holiday or it's a Sunday and you have results and need a permit, we're going to be there to process and approve it. Finally, this is the bottom of the sheet. So this is the part where basically the representative for the company is signing off that, yes, I have met all these product specific movement requirements in the secure poultry supply plan. And so you sign off. This needs to be emailed to us, and it goes to poultry permit at boa.in.gov. None of this PDF should never be printed and filled out and faxed or scanned back. It needs to stay electronic the entire time. So if you're not familiar with doing electronic signatures, please practice and set them up for whomever would be filling out these permits. We have instructions on how to do those, but we need to make sure that this document stays electronic the entire time. When you send it to us, we will review the information, determine in which direction birds are moving, when within, into, out of a control area. Are they eligible? Does the accession number match the results that we're seeing from Purdue ADDL that are negative and they're for that premises? So we will do those types of things and then approve the permit, put our state seal on it, and send it back to you with our signature. In most cases, you'll want to then print that off and give it to the transporter. Now, if your transport is within your company, if you're going from your farm to your plant, it's not necessary that you would have to carry the permit, but certainly if you're sending then to to another company or organization that you do business with, I would suggest printing them off and keeping them in the truck with you. So those are kind of the things that I wanted to cover, and I'm happy to take any questions, or we can turn it to the next individual.
Questions for Dr. Cooper?
I just have a quick one. Maria, I just did a quick search and I couldn't put my hands on that permit document that you just went over. Could you give us a place where we can get a copy of it? I just want to run that past our business office to make sure that we're still set to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. I will email it to you here right now, Dr. Murphy, and I will also send the updated copy to Becky for distribution or post on her website. And I'm happy to practice that with any of you. I mean, fill one out. I'll let you know if you filled it out correctly and you got your signature on there. Send it to the email. I check that email every day. We'll see it there, and we will let you know if you did it right and send it back to you in an approved fashion. So happy me to practice with anyone.
Thank you.
Please take Dr. Cooper up on that offer. That sounds like a good use of a few minutes during peacetime to make sure that form works for you. Other questions for Dr. Cooper? Okay. Well, I guess we can move on to the next portion. There's Dr. Shipman.
Perfect. Thanks, Becky, and thanks for the opportunity to speak to you all today. Just wanted to do a brief overview of kind of what the plan looks like for infected premises. So this would be avian influenza infected prems, particularly of high path variety. So again, you've seen this triangle before. This is the area we're focusing on. That I'll focus on is just these infected sites. So through the quarantine, depopulation, disposal, and restocking phases. So these steps, these are the 10 steps that, like I said before, you have seen. We're going to really look at steps 2 through 9. It should go fairly quickly, but just wanted, if you have not seen this, this is a really quick overview of kind of what the process looks like for sites that are affected with HPAI. So our first step is always going to be containment, right? So once a diagnosis of highly pathogenic avian influenza does occur, containment is of utmost importance. So that generally is going to involve PPE and enhanced biosecurity. So what that biosecurity looks like at the end of the driveway can vary per site. We understand, depending on the resources that are available, the time of year, there's a lot of factors that influence what this biosecurity line looks like. The most important thing is that it does occur. The first thing we want to do is to restrict traffic. So making sure that no non-essential visitors and minimizing the vehicular traffic that is crossing this line. And then if it does cross this line and comes back off, then we need to make sure that it's going through a cleaning and disinfection process. This is a piece that at the production level, down at the premises level rather, that a lot of planning can be put into place, right? What does that look like on your site? Generally, we want an area that can facilitate biosecurity of a semi-truck, because depending on the resources that need to be delivered to that site, especially if it's composting, it likely will be delivered on a semi. So making sure that the biosecurity area is large enough to accommodate at least one of those, or at least 2 to 3 pickup trucks at one time. Water is critically important. Generally, poultry producers have access to a poultry sprayer. They become incredibly helpful during this process. And during the colder weather, able to recirculate them, kind of put the nozzle back into the tank and let it run. This is incredibly important in order to facilitate the movement on and off the property, and ensure that the response is occurring in as timely a manner as possible. And then PPE. PPE will vary depending on the contact that is with the poultry. So if they're coming into contact with the poultry and it's a response personnel, that PPE is going to look different than if they just happen to live on the premises and they're going to their house. So you can see in that far right picture there, the process that folks underwent to exit a high path positive farm, the personnel there. So contact time is really important. We need to make sure that we have someone timing this, as well as any time a response personnel crosses that biosecurity line, we need to document their name and their contact information. This is so the State Department of Health can follow up with them and conduct surveillance for influenza-like illness to ensure that we're not having a zoonotic spread of these virus. So the next step is going to be indemnity and compensation. This is really just a 30,000-foot view, not going to dive into the weeds on this. In Indiana, we have a dual case manager approach. So we have a state case manager and a federal case manager. The state case manager is going to help that producer work through the logistics of of getting through that timeline, that 2 through 10 or the 1 through 10 on the slides before, the federal case manager, their focus is going to be on money, getting that producer indemnified and compensated for their losses from the disease. So that divide and conquer strategy has worked for us in the past, and we would continue that strategy forward. So like Dr. Kopp mentioned earlier, and Dr. Murphy brought up as well, the unique entity identifier, that's formerly the DUNS number. Basically, the DUNS is a for-profit corporation, and the US government said they can do it themselves. So as long as you are enrolled in the SAM and registration system, you already have a unique identity identifier assigned to you. And this program goes into effect April 4th, 2022. So if you do have questions in this whole process and what that looks like, whether you have or had a DUNS number, or if you're in the SAM management system, don't hesitate to reach out to USDA Farm Service Agency. They are a great resource. And if you've ever received federal dollars, whether it be for crops or animals, you likely have been in this system. So reach out to the FSA offices and they can help walk you through those steps. So as we also talked about earlier, the appraisal indemnity for the birds and eggs, this is an important part. So the flock inventory, the flock records, USDA would be eligible to indemnify the birds that are currently alive at the time of reporting. So that flock inventory at that time is incredibly important. And then depopulation and disposal. Once we start rolling into depop and disposal, between those two steps, we're going to agree upon a flock plan. Flock plan is between the owner operator, the USDA veterinary services in the state to determine the who, what, when, where, and why, and who's paying for it of the rest of the operation, right? So by doing that, we can agree what methods are going to occur, how they are going to occur, who is financially responsible for doing them, who is responsible for carrying out those tasks, and really that flock plan kind of sets us up for success. And sets that expectation. One little kind of piece of information to consider is before depopulation disposal occurs, make sure you're accounting and go out and check your utility meters as well as the equipment readings, like the hours on the vehicles that may be used in depopulation or disposal, because the utilities used during depopulation and disposal of the poultry in the poultry facilities can potentially be reimbursed. So document those meters, whether it's your water meter, your propane, your natural gas, your electricity, the Bobcat hours, whatever that may be, document those hours, take a picture of it, that's all it takes, so that the case manager, the federal case manager, can work with you to submit that for reimbursement. And then last but not least, the virus elimination. The way virus elimination funding works is that is covered by USDA. You get half of, and it's calculated on a either square foot or density basis. And so with that, whatever that calculated number is, half that money is delivered to the producer first to kind of start executing that process of virus elimination. The second part of that money is released to the producer upon successful completion and negative testing of the premises. So that's just kind of the money piece around indemnity and compensation. By having a federal case manager assigned, we really did find that we were able to kind of get this piece flowing back to the producers in a timely manner. So depopulation, this is what a lot of people kind of focus on. How do we get the birds dead? In high-path AI, the one benefit, if you will, is that the mortality rate's quite high. So the disease itself will kill a number of the birds, but obviously not all of them. So that's the first thing we're going to evaluate is what percentage of birds are currently alive in each of these houses. So if the virus has already killed 90% of the birds, it doesn't make sense for us to come in with some of these whole house approaches, right? A more manual method like captive bolt or cervical dislocation may be appropriate to kind of do that fine, precise euthanasia. if we caught the virus relatively early in the disease process, or it's the birds aren't dying from it, then we can take a whole house approach, whether that be whole house gassing with CO2 or water-based foaming. So the state of Indiana does have some experience with water-based foaming. I would not say it's a lot. We would consider ourselves more of a support for that and the resources needed, but the expertise is not there. It can be quite finicky. We've actually been working a little bit in the swine industry on what water-based foaming a swine looks like. And they've had quite some success with that in really simplifying the machinery necessary to deliver the foam. And that's been a big key in delivering foam during these animal health emergencies, is keeping it as simple as possible, especially the machinery that really likes to break. It has been important. So that's just something to consider. You know, if it's a layer operation, a mat cart with CO2 is absolutely appropriate. Access to whole house CO2, both the manifolds and the CO2 itself, can be quite difficult to obtain. You also require the expertise and to deliver that successfully. Last but not least is ventilation shutdown plus, the plus being heat or CO2. It's important that one of these is added to just ventilation shutdown. I will just say this is only applied in constrained circumstances, and to remind everyone that USDA has to agree on the depopulation method prior to depopulation occurring in order for it to be funded. So that's the money piece, right? So that's how they can help dictate which of these is appropriate. That's not to say they won't choose it or approve it, but we have to go through this process, especially ventilation shutdown, prior to it occurring. So if ventilation shutdown is a tool in your toolbox on your poultry premises, I would encourage you to take a look at USDA's ventilation shutdown plus guidance document online. It's with their HiPath AI resources. It was last updated 6 days ago, so it has changed. So I would just encourage you, if that's something that you would like to do, please take a look at that to make sure you have an understanding of where it fits in the decision flow of if it's allowable or not. So then jumping into disposal, right? So we have off-site and on-site options. Off-site, we can look at incineration, likely commercial incineration. This is going to be either for smaller flocks or for some precision depopulation on a large site, in which the positive birds could be biosecurely packaged and taken off-site to a commercial incinerator. This has been exercised in Indiana with great success, and those communications have continued to be maintained with those commercial operations. So this is viable. Likely not going to send a whole laying complex to incineration, but kind of that threshold is about 150,000 laying birds equivalents, whatever that may be. So wrap your head around that. Likely going to be smaller flocks and a more precision depopulation tool or disposal tool. As Amy mentioned prior, landfill, we've worked with IDEM to continue those conversations on landfill disposal. Just a reminder that this is not normal landfilling. This waste is not disposed of in a way in which the landfills typically handle it. So there is a learning curve for the landfill. It is an extra burden on the landfill to take on this waste. That's why our friends at the IDEM are continuing these conversations to keep them open-minded to the possibility of accepting this waste during an incident. The last offsite is rendering. We keep it on the table as an option, but unlikely due to the nature of the rendered products and their willingness to accept a known positive product in their rendering stream. As far as on-site goes, we do have options there as well. Burning is technically there, unlikely, and likely not the best way to dispose of these, but it is there. Burial is quite challenging in Indiana with the high water table. That's just one where our water table is so high that we often encounter water as soon as we're starting to bury these birds. I will add though, that, and it'll also come down to above ground burial, BOA is in the rulemaking process currently to update our disposal rules. So last year, the legislator removed the 4-foot requirement on burial. So that's no longer a requirement that 4 feet of dirt be on top of the carcass. The rule that our board heard for the first time last week basically adopts a standards-based approach instead of a strict 4 feet, straight 4 feet on top of it. So we're definitely encouraged by the standards-based approach. And obviously we'll be sharing that documentation with Becky for her review and input on that. Composting is the most likely way of disposal during a high path event of the affected flocks. It is an art and science combined. It's important that it's done correctly and that experts are utilized to compost the birds and the manure and litter appropriately. But it is quite effective. Per the USDA policy, it does take 30 days. Remember, that's a 14-day on each side of the turn, and it must reach 131 degrees for 72 consecutive hours in order for it to be approved for the turn and eventually released. So that's an important piece to keep in mind there. And as Dr. Murphy talked about earlier, and it has been mentioned, above ground burial is definitely an option, right? And so this is a novel technique for disposal for those who aren't aware. It's shallow burial. We're looking between 20 to 24 inch deep trench in the ground with a layer of carbonaceous material like mulch, and then a layer of mortality, carcass mortality, and then the dirt that was dug out of the trench placed back on top. So this has been researched pretty well in livestock. They're still working on that research in poultry to see what that would look like. But the researchers I've talked to say there's no reason it shouldn't perform as expected as it does in livestock. There is actually USDA guidance documents for above ground burial, and BOA's new proposed disposal rule actually incorporates those standards and into an above ground burial section. So it would be a standalone disposal option for both emergency mortalities as well as normal mortalities. So we are going, we've reviewed this, we've contacted the subject matter expert in this area, and stay tuned for more information about above ground burial and how it could be used during an incident. So just some kind of rough pictures of what the disposal options look like. Again, composting can occur both inside and outside of a house. We'd like for it to occur inside a house when possible, but it is important to remember that we vent. A lesson learned is vent those houses so that it doesn't turn into a terrarium and it starts a rain cycle onto the compost pile, because that can ruin a lot of electronics and mechanical items within the poultry house. So these can, like I said, happen depending on the house design, both inside or on the left outside, where you can see there's that base layer of carbonaceous material, the windrow core of a carcass and litter, and then a cap on the outside to prevent access from wild animals and for the pile to perform appropriately. And then the map on the right is of landfills that have agreed to continue participation and consider accepting high path waste. Super fun slide, just the QR code, but this is to the carcass management dashboard, right? So if you're looking at the cost analysis of what this looks like, the carcass management dashboard is a great tool to kind of work through what disposal option would be best for your premises. So each of your premises, we understand, can have their own factors that come into play, their location to resources around them. Take a look at this tool, and that is a great tool that USDA has put together and some resources specifically on disposal. So virus elimination, this is kind of heading down the home front here. It's a two-step process where it's both cleaning and then disinfection. So cleaning can be either dry cleaning and or wet cleaning. We prefer at least a dry cleaning first to knock down as much as possible so that the wet cleaning can be used as sparingly as possible. A lesson learned from 2015 in the upper Midwest is wet cleaning was used almost exclusively, and the amount of water that was used plus the machinery that was necessary really impacted the clay floors of the turkey houses. So being sparing on the water and trying to dry clean first definitely helped. Once that occurs, hopping into the step 2, which is the disinfection options, there's 3 options. At least one of them must be selected. But you know, depending on the circumstances, the animal health official, VS, and or the company could choose to do more than one of these. So drying and heating, again, that's between 100 degrees and 120 degrees Fahrenheit for 7 days total, 3 of which must be consecutive. People often say there's no way that can happen. It really can happen. You know, we had an egg laying complex that did this specifically, and it was, I mean, it was around 30 degrees outside, right? And we're able to maintain these temperatures. The bigger concern is actually not making sure it doesn't get too hot. You can get some infrastructure damage if it gets too hot in those facilities. So that can be done. So don't be intimidated by that. It can be done. Again, wet disinfection, that's gonna be your typical disinfection, making sure it's an approved EPA antimicrobial. And then fumigation. We also had some facilities that decided to utilize fumigation. Again, that just needs to be with an EPA registered sterilant for both porous and non-porous surfaces. So yeah, it's up to the company, but at least one of these needs to be employed. Again, the way that the regulatory officials, both VS and BOA, are evaluating virus elimination is by environmental sampling. So that's how we determine if it's successful. So the environmental sampling occurs during the 21-day fallow period, which is immediately following virus elimination. So the premises has to sit empty for 21 days. And during that time, the regulatory team comes out and samples the structures and environment in and around these poultry complexes. So 250 surfaces are sampled per house. They are all PCR tested. If it is PCR detected, then it has to go out to NVSL for virus isolation to determine if the virus was active or inactive. We did have some samples that were virus isolated. They were found to be inactive. That's okay. That means there was virus in the environment and we didn't completely wash it away, but whatever was used to inactivate the virus worked appropriately. And then once it's determined that the environment is free of active virus and the 21-day fallow period has occurred, then the premises is approved for restocking. So that's a lot of information I ran through quickly, but USDA actually keeps all these response documents. There's 50+ documents at this website here that they update periodically, which helps both us and the industry kind of walk through the steps of what an incident looks like. And step by step, there's a ton of information on disposal specifically there as well. So if you are interested, I'd encourage you to go to that website and take a look at those disposal options. And with that, I'll take any questions.
Thank you, Kyle. And any questions for Kyle? Okay. All right. Well, thank you very much for that. Let's see here. Oh, kind of lost my agenda. It's over here. Let's see. I have permanent movement meetings, but I'm thinking we've already done that, Dr. Cooper, kind of up top. as well as the sample labeling and packaging and barcoding. So maybe on, is that true? Because I know you shifted some things around. And can we move on to ADDL?
Yes, I think I covered what I wanted to cover with permitted movement. I'm not sure if you wanted to discuss anything further, but I think Dr. Lossie probably has additional information about sample packaging and collection.
Okay.
Yes, I do.
Hello, Dr. Lassie.
Hello, how are you? I just have, as Dr. Cooper described, some information on sample labeling, packaging, and our submission forms to use in the event of an outbreak scenario. So I will attempt to share my screen here. All right. This into... Now, are you able to see the full screen, Becky, or is it just the?
Yes. Yeah. It's in full screen mode. Looks great.
Okay, great. So I want to say thank you to Dr. Craig Bowen, who also here at the ADDL, who also helped out with a vast majority of this presentation. So I will try to keep things brief. Just wanted to say, first off, as always, step one is contacting BOA. So in the event of a potential AI suspect flock, always contact BOA first. They will relay all of the pertinent information to us here at the ADDL in kind of a first incident for the state. So for example, if this was an index case or the first case, BOA would relay all the information to us and get us ready. But there's still stuff for the companies that you guys need to do and get us as well. And these are some of our forms. So the first form that we'll talk about briefly is the avian health submission form. If we are not in an outbreak scenario, so there is not an active outbreak, it is most appropriate to use the avian health submission form for an initial mortality event for sampling. Again, if it's not during an active outbreak situation. And all of these slides I will be getting to Becky, as well as some of the supplementary documents. So no worries, all of this you will have access to. So this is the same, the avian health submission form is the same form that you would use in the event of submitting any of your diagnostics. Here's an example of the first parts, the first page of our form. Some important things to note, veterinarian. If you have a company veterinarian or you're using a contract vet that you would like to list as your vet, that section would go here. Email is the big important section. So if you have 5 or 6 people within your company that you want to receive results, we need those emails listed here or here. And then if there are additional, I'm going to go one slide ahead. If you have additional emails, you can put those in the history section as well. So please just make sure, especially if you haven't submitted to us before, that we have all of the contact information that we need. Other important things is our billing. So usually this is bill to owner, which is the company. So the company name and address. So this would be like your home base where all of your billing and that kind of stuff goes here. The animal section up here, this is where you're going to put all of the address information and phone number for the site that the samples or birds or whatever you're sending us is coming from. Here is that all important section for the premise ID code or ID barcode that Dr. Cooper talked about generating. This is also new, so this might be new to some of you. We like to we now have a reason box. So are you submitting your samples for NPIP testing, health monitoring, depopulation, general diagnostic, or interstate movement? Second page here is history. Major important things. We need the age is always helpful. How many birds are on site? How many sick? How many dead? The breed. So if these are Highlines or Lomans or are they Ross, whatever the breed is. And then the type here. And then if this was an avian influenza incident, or you think it could be and you want that, that is what you want to rule out. Right where I have this asterisk, you would write, rule out avian influenza. and, or Newcastle disease, for example. The next lines, boxes that you'll see here are the samples submitted. So if you had one premise that had 4 barns and you were submitting 4 tubes, for example, you could put barn A, barn B, barn C, barn D. Again, breed, you could just write it once, draw a line down, same with sex and age. For sample type, if we're talking about avian influenza for our gallinaceous birds, that would be a tracheal choanal cleft swab. So you'd write that there and then note the date that it was taken. On the second page of our form, again, with our example for AI, we have a special box just for AI testing. So you would mark that main box. You would mark that the samples have been pooled according to USDA guidelines, and I'll have a link later in the PowerPoint and have that document available for you all. You would mark whether you're using the 3 mil BHI tubes or 5.5 mils. And then these are our 4 methodologies for testing: PCR, antigen capture, AGID, or ELISA. And so you would mark which one of those you're submitting for. In the event of a mortality event, of course, it would be PCR. Now, the next form that we'll move on to is the commercial poultry incident form. This is the form that is used once an AI event has been confirmed in the state. So if you are in the control zone and you are not infected, but you need to move product out of that control zone, or if this is for the initial testing within a zone, this is the form that you would use. As Dr. Cooper mentioned, each premise needs its own accession form. So if you have John's farm and it's right next to Bill's farm, but they're each considered its own premise, each one of those, John's farm and let's say Bill's farm, they need to be on their own accession form. If you ever have any questions about whether you need multiple accession forms, please do not hesitate to ask. So here is an example of the commercial poultry incident form. So again, we have our company, we have company veterinarian or contact person, the test requested, either AI, PCR, or Newcastle disease. This is where you start to fill out some of that information for what you need for the testing. So are you in the control zone? Is this part of the surveillance zone? And of course, BOA can help you understand those definitions. And then the reason. So is this just for surveillance? Is this now your post cleaning and disinfection? Or is this for permitted movement in and out or into a control zone? Similar to the regular accession form, this is where you would mark, let's say you have one premise. So broiler maker poultry company, it's one single premise that has 5 barns and they're labeled as 1, 2, 3, 4, and south barn. There are 2 tubes per house of 11 pooled samples. Again, here we have oropharyngeal, which is what you would do for gallinaceous birds. If this was for waterfowl, it would be cloacal swabs, or if it was for an environmental swab, post cleaning and disinfection to detect that virus, you would mark environmental swabs. So we have a few other associated forms to go through here. This is our commercial poultry producers' contact information. This you don't have to send us right away, but in the event of an outbreak, this form becomes very important, as this is our form where you tell us the company veterinarian for your company. So the person that's going to be working within your company on those movement permits, backup contact, and reporting of results. And so this form ensures that we are getting the right information to those of you at your company who need it. So in the event of an outbreak scenario, we would expect every company that will be submitting us samples to fill out this form. You only need to fill it out once, but if something changes during the course of that outbreak and different people need to be listed as contacts, we need to know that as well. So please keep that in mind. This is just another simple form. This is a contents shipper form. So this is a form, and we'll show, or I'll show you shortly with some examples of packaging. But this just tells us total numbers of tubes and the numbers of premises represented. Because if you have 50 farms within a control zone and you need to send us 50, you might be having multiple premises within a box that you are shipping us for your samples. So we need the total number of tubes and the total number of premises, and then who it was prepared by. If we have any questions, or let's say a tube was broken or damaged or a label fell off, this is where we also need a phone number so we can get in contact with you, so we can make sure that those results or the error or issue can get resolved quickly. So finally, or not finally, but step 3, prepping your samples for shipping. I'm not going to go as depth into this. Again, you guys will have all of this to refer back to if you ever need it. But some of the big things, we do need those premise ID barcodes, and we need that complete shipping contents form. And once you have your forms filled out, so recommend filling out all your forms first, now you need to prep your samples. You need to prep your BHI broth tubes for sampling at the farm. I believe it was Dr. Cooper mentioned, if you have experience with those BHI broth tubes, if you just thawed them out, there's going to be moisture condensing on the sides of those broth tubes, and it can make it very difficult to either put a label on there or to sometimes even use a Sharpie. So if you let them thaw out a little bit and just get to room temperature, it becomes easier. So the preferred methods are to label them with a Sharpie or wait for that moisture to not condense on the outside, put a barcode on there, but then put packing tape over that barcode so that barcode does not slip off. When you go out for sampling, always remember to bring some extra tubes and swabs just in case. So there are 2 primary bags that we discuss in the document that I'll send you guys out. There's the primary bag and the secondary bags. The primary bag will hold all of the tubes from a given premise. So if I have Jeff's chicken farm and I have 5 barns on my farm, that primary bag will contain 5 secondary bags. So you'll have 1 secondary bag for each individual barn or house. Again, in an AI scenario, that would be 2 different tubes. So again, on each of the bags, we need the company owner name, we need the location site, and then again, a barcode. Secondary bag, pretty much same information: company, site information, farm name, and premise ID barcode. Please tape over the labels that are on the bags. Again, if the labels come off during shipping, it can make it very difficult for us to tell where they came from, especially if we have large numbers of samples within one shipment. So make sure to cover all labels on the bags with clear packing tape to help make sure it sticks there and to make it waterproof. Collecting of samples, make sure you follow the USDA avian sample collection for influenza A and Newcastle disease guidelines, which I'll have linked here directly in the PowerPoint. Again, if you have any questions, do not hesitate to ask. Biosecurity of tubes and bags. So after collection of tubes on the farm, please make sure to wipe the outside of a tube with an appropriate disinfectant prior to placing the tubes in their appropriate bags. We also ask that you wipe down the primary and secondary bags, and recommend that that main secondary bag stay outside of the farm environment. So the bag that 4 of your barn samples are going to go into, keep that outside as clean as possible, and then just take the primary bags from inside and then drop it into there to keep that clean, and then wipe it down as well. Packaging of your samples for shipment. To pack, I'm not going to read through this whole thing here, but what I want you to see on the next slide is an example of everything that you would need. So here is your secondary bag. Here is your primary bag. So we have 1, 2, and 3. So these represent 3 barns on one premise. Each of these bags goes into your secondary bag. Please note that they all have their barcodes and there's tape over the labels. Here is your submission form. Note that it is also within a sealed plastic bag. Then that would go into your insulated shipper. So we do need an insulated shipper, so a styrofoam box or a styrofoam container within a cardboard box. Of course, you'll also have ice packs and shipping and filling material to make sure that those tubes get damaged. Luckily, these days, the tubes that we get from NVSL are plastic and are no longer glass, which is great. In terms of finally getting everything together in that box, this is the shipping contents form as an example. So you can just set that right on top. What you'll notice here is these are your submission forms. What we recommend if you're shipping to us is to set them off, kind of off to the side, and then put a small piece of tape to stick it to the lid. That way, if when you put the flaps over and we use a box cutter to open the box, if your main accession form was sitting right here, taped to the front of this box, we don't want to cut through that or damage it. So kind of slide it down a little bit into the edge of the box there and put a piece of tape there just to keep that in place. Make sure you have your shipping label. If a package is going by courier, there is our address. Hand delivery of samples. If you are hand delivering samples, you're driving them from the farm. We ask that you keep the paperwork outside of the shipper, and we ask that you coordinate with us so that we can be ready to get those samples directly from you as soon as you arrive. So please call us to let us know when you're 15 minutes out. Do not take samples in through the front doors. We will have personnel and PPE come out to meet you to get those samples. So the last couple quick things here, ordering broth and contact information. So if you need to order BHI broth for your company, which I always recommend you have it on hand, this is the website to do so. It's a fillable PDF form that goes to the NVSL, and you can get that BHI broth at no cost to you. Here are some important contact information. This is our main line to get in touch with BOA, and then please, folks at BOA, correct me if I'm wrong or if there's a different number that I should have used. I just looked up the FAD phone number for BOA. And of course, if you ever need anything related to submissions, I think most people have my cell, but here's my cell in case you need that. With that, the only other thing, I will take up just one more minute of your time. I do want to make a quick note since we're talking about avian influenza. What happens if you submit samples for ELISA testing for avian influenza and we get a positive sample? We've had some questions come up regarding that. So the ELISA that we use is what we call a very sensitive test. It picks up almost anything and everything to a degree. That what can happen with a very sensitive test is it's good because it picks up a lot of the positives, but what can happen is you get a false positive. Now, if we get a false positive on AI, avian influenza serology, that happens from time to time, and it does occur. The immediate next step with that sample, assuming it's not associated with a major mortality event, let's just say you're doing your regular NPIP AI clean testing, is we run what is called the AGID test. And that is an automatic process. As soon as we get an ELISA positive, we will let your company know. But I'm just kind of going over this so everyone on the call has the benefit. So as soon as we get a positive on an ELISA, we take the rest of that serum from that sample and do a test called an AGID, which is the approved confirmatory serology test. If that AGID is negative, nothing more needs to happen. If the AGID comes back as positive, then that's when we start talking about potentially collecting more samples and getting more samples in to the lab for testing. So I just wanted to clarify that just because you see results come back and it says AI, ELISA, 1 out of 11 positive, that does not mean that we found AI. That's most likely a false positive, which they all have been, and that will be confirmed negative with our AGID. And as soon as we get an AI ELISA positive, we are running that AGID the same day, but it does take 24 hours to come back. So sorry for that little segue, but just wanted to clarify some things for some folks who thought it might help. And with that, thank you very much for your time, everybody.
Thank you, Dr. Lossy, and we just appreciate all the work you do over there. It was an excellent presentation. Getting down to those details, I think there was an incident going on. Hopefully, we're going to be sharing this recording, so it'll be a good reference. Any questions for Dr. Lossy? All right, any questions for anybody else? We still have a good number of folks who presented on the call, and just, you know, within reason, any question you might have. All right, well, very much appreciate all of our presenters today and all the you know, condensing all the very hard work and detailed work that you do all year round into succinct presentations for us here. And we have recorded this webinar. We will be preparing that and sending it out to those folks who participated today. We'll also arrange to have it hosted on our website someplace in a protected area as a good reference. We just appreciate all of you, and don't hesitate to reach out and contact us with any questions, concerns, things you want to learn more about that you'd like for us to address in the future. And wish you well. Have a great day. Thank you.